Coming in at number 10 is Adrian Toomes. Kicking off this list on the very mild end, we gotta start with the MCU because, as most of you know, the film and television versions of Marvel's universe have never and likely will never go to the dark depths that their comic counterparts will. Despite that though, the actors in some of these films can really serve up a small taste of darkness that can put a chill down your spine. For example, in Spider-Man Homecoming, the main antagonist is Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, played extremely and unsurprisingly well by Michael Keaton. In a really unexpected moment when Peter Parker arrives at his date Liz's house, he is greeted at the door by Adrian, Liz's father. Adrian drives the pair to their dance, and Toomes gradually figures out that Peter Parker is the Spider-Man. At the end of this car ride, Toomes actually pulls a weapon on Peter and very calmly threatens Peter with the end of his life and those he loves if Spider-Man does not back off. It's an incredibly well acted scene and makes you feel just how serious things just got for Peter Parker. Number 9. John Walker. Fast forward a little bit later on in the MCU timeline to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now this is after Steve Rogers has stopped being Captain America. Instead, John Walker has taken up the Captain America mantle on orders from the government. As comic fans know, John Walker is not the greatest guy around, and in the MCU, it's no different. Well, maybe a little bit more restrained. A little. In one of the most shocking and dark scenes from the show, from episode 4, after the Flag Smashers caused the passing of Walker's best friend Lamar, John chases down one of the Flag Smashers, and in front of a crowd of people, he very brutally uses the shield of Captain America to bring the Flag Smasher to an end. The image of the bloody shield of Captain America is such a surprising thing to see, especially out in the MCU, and it's left everyone who saw this scene for the first time slack-jawed and lost for words. Hey guys, if you are enjoying this video so far, make sure you drop a like. One way to let us know that we are doing a good job. We very much appreciate it. Number 8. Brian Banner. Fans of The Incredible Hulk are well aware of how dark and messed up the character's past is. It's a partial reason that Bruce was able to become the Hulk in the first place. A large part of his darker past has to do with Bruce's father, Brian Banner. Brian was a less than ideal father figure. For starters, because of his job researching atomic radiation, he believed that his DNA was altered and that when Bruce was born, he was some kind of monster because of it. Brian also became jealous of how much attention Rebecca Banner gave to baby Bruce. Brian went pretty much insane, in other words. As some of you know, Brian became responsible for the passing of Rebecca Banner. On the anniversary of her funeral, Bruce was visiting her grave, and Brian, recently released from the mental hospital, arrived. But Brian wasn't cured at all. He attacked Bruce, but all the years of torment had built up inside of Bruce, and in one kick, Bruce threw Brian off balance and he fell backwards, hitting his head off of the gravestone of Rebecca Banner and instantly ending his life. This moment was so haunting to Bruce that he just erased it from his own mind, convincing himself for years that his father passed due to a mugging. Number 7. Making the Maker. The Fantastic Four in the Ultimate Universe remained relatively the same, at least in their family dynamics. Their backstory was slightly modified, but overall the four main heroes lived as you'd expect, until it all went Marvel Ultimate-y. First off, Sue Storm and Reed Richards lost a child together, but then Reed Richards proposed to Susan Storm and she rejected his proposal. Just like that, the Fantastic Four was no more, but that's not the end. What came next, really quickly I might add, was Reed going absolutely bonkers, faking his death, de-lifing his family, planning alien terror plots around the world, being trapped in the negative zone where he primed his intellect by stretching his brain and skull, and he built an army. Since he was horribly burnt by the Human Torch, Reed took to wearing a helmet and founded the Children of Tomorrow, the Dark Ultimates, and he called himself the Maker. He became an incredibly evil Reed Richards. Number 6. Cap hates France? Look, despite the name, Captain America, Steve Rogers, is very much a protector of the world, not just America. So it was really odd when in Ultimates number 12 from Mark Miller, Brian Hitch, and Paul Neary, we see the Ultimate Marvel Universe Captain America verbally wailing on France, of all places. Captain America is caught in a fight with Herr Kleiser, an old German rival. Just for better context, Nick Fury is there too. Captain America is obviously the hero though, so eventually he gets the upper hand. It was just so odd that when Kleiser was pinned by Cap and asking for surrender, well, Cap digs his shield into the dude's stomach and says, "Surrender? Surrender? You think this letter on my head stands for France?" The comment was kind of fueled by the time period it was written in, as the states were entering into a war and France refused to join them, leading to some anti-France feelings in the real world. But this World War II era dig at the country left a bad taste in pretty much everyone's mouth, especially from a character that is supposed to be much, much better than that. Number 5. Wolverine. Why are you so weird? Look, I'm gonna get into all the weirdness that is the Ultimate Universe Wolverine in a sec, but one thing that kind of immediately sticks out is how this version of Wolverine seems to repeatedly swing for ladies that are a little below his age bracket, or like a lot below, and always redheads, which I guess kinda checks out from the 616 version too. Jean Grey, Firestar, and the one we're talking about today, Mary Jane Watson. In Ultimate Spider-Man number 66, Wolverine and Peter Parker end up switching bodies after Wolverine makes some unwanted advances on the teenage Jean Grey, who psychically swapped their bodies. I don't know why she did that, but she did it. Wolverine finds some drawbacks, but apparently they pale in comparison to the perk that is the teenage Peter's girlfriend, Mary Jane. Wolverine tells MJ that he, in Peter's body, doesn't need to go to school, while also making some crude advances towards her as well. It comes off as kinda creepy and really cringy. Number 4. Wolverine. How you die. Now, on the topic of Wolverine, he himself has quite a few moments that make him kinda awesome and some that make him kinda horrible. Ultimate Wolverine is no longer feral, and he does not have the classic healing factor. Instead, he gets the survival factor, which is kind of a heck of a lot better. He can survive a heck of a lot, almost anything. S.H.I.E.L.D. chopped his body off, leaving only his head, and he breathed through his skin. They put his head in a vacuum and he went into stasis. Hulk ripped his body and threw it into another mountain range, and when Wolverine found that half, it was still fresh, no organ failure, no rot, and the blood was somehow still pumping. And he just put himself back together again with no issues. Ultimate Wolverine is unkillable by any means, no matter what you do. It was also implied that Ultimate Wolverine was the precursor of all mutants. He was sort of the first mutant in the world. So all the other mutants are basically products of Weapon X experimentation on Wolverine. On top of that, his blood could be synthesized into a substance that gives mutants insane power boosts. Marvel made Ultimate Wolverine insanely overpowered, and then they absolutely killed him in the stupidest way possible. He died because Magneto did a hand wave thingamajig, as someone on Reddit said, and apparently he destroyed every single one of Wolverine's cells while ripping out his adamantium. Number 3. Is this Game of Thrones? If you haven't noticed by some of the previous points, Marvel did a lot of unnecessary sexualizing of the Ultimate Universe. And to just push it a bit further into unnecessary odd choices made by Marvel for this universe, they included the incestuous relationship between the characters of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Somehow it actually feels worse than the one in Game of Thrones, maybe just because it was extremely shocking and the two characters never had anything even similar to this in the 616 continuity. Fans wondered whether it was really necessary for Mark Miller to pair the two characters together and questioned whether the twist added anything new to the story at all. Answer: it didn't. Probably the biggest issue with this revelation is that now the characters can't so much as look at each other without fans accusing the writers of returning to the incest plot from the Ultimate X-Men. Number 2. Blob. After the events of that ultimatum thing, which I'm so close to talking about, many heroes were taken out and or unaccounted for. One such hero would be Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp. Now, as we know, Hank Pym, Ant-Man, was kind of the worst. And though a terrible husband, he still diligently looked for his missing wife. What he found instead was the villain the Blob feasting on her remains. It's probably one of the most striking images from the whole Ultimate Universe, but it just gets stranger and somehow worse. Enraged at the sight of it, Ant-Man converted to his giant man state and picked up the Blob in his giant hand and bit Blob's head clean off and spat it on the ground to the shock and horror of his teammates. And in at number 1 is Ultimatum. Ultimatum ultimatum was supposed to be how the writers finished off the Ultimate Universe stories. Obviously it didn't turn out that way, but as you can tell from previous points, writers kinda just went a little haywire with things they would do with a dying universe story. Basically, Magneto, who has been a pretty brutal villain in this universe so far, goes even farther during the Mega event where stakes were way high. Basically, after Magneto gains control of the Hammer of Thor and is manipulated by none other than Dr. Doom, he messes with the magnetic pillars of the world, flipping them on their head and sending weather into a frenzy. The big event was a giant tsunami called the Ultimatum Wave that basically put New York underwater and brought a giant casualty list along with it. Bruce Banner drowns, but the Hulk lives, the Wasp gets eaten, as mentioned before, and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are killed off. In a bit more of a divisive move, while the X-Men are looking for their fallen teammates in the wake of the tidal wave in New York, Magneto pays a visit to Professor X and in a pretty brutal scene, snaps the professor's neck. Magneto also rips the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton and pretty much disintegrates him like we talked about before. And at number 10 is Werewolf by Night. Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night, made his Marvel debut in 1971's Marvel Spotlight number 2. He was actually born in Transylvania as Jacob Rusoff. Russell is a descendant of Grigory Rusoff, who in 1795 was turned into a werewolf after fighting Dracula. Grigory managed to keep the curse dormant for many generations until it was reactivated by Jack's grandfather, Gregor, using powers from a copy of the Darkhold. When under the full moon, the curse turns Gregor and his descendants into werewolves with supernatural abilities including enhanced strength, stamina, agility, reflexes, speed, senses, and durability, with a regenerative healing factor, but a weakness of silver. In his solo series from 1972, Jack fights threats like Dracula and enemies that either want to steal his abilities or steal his family's copy of the Darkhold. He even came into a famous conflict in issue number 32 in May of 1975 that introduced Moon Knight to Marvel Comics. He is also soon to be a part of the MCU alongside a few other monsters. Number 9. Franken-Castle. After he was killed by Daken on orders from Norman Osborn during the Dark Reign event, Frank Castle, yes, the Punisher, was revived by the Legion of Monsters as an undead zombie-like monster known as Franken-Castle. The Legion resurrected Frank to recruit him in their fight against the villain known as Hellsguard, who was systematically killing off monsters using samurai-like assassins. Although he originally refused to help, Frank got involved after seeing innocent younger monsters being dispatched too, and that is not something Frank is willing to abide. So he went on to slay hordes of Hellsguard's men. It's honestly an incredibly interesting moment in Frank Castle's history, and it got this version of Frank moved to Earth 666. He also nearly enacted revenge against Daken, being stopped by Wolverine before he was returned to his human form through the Bloodstone. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video and you aren't already subscribed, be sure to slap that subscribe button to see more lists and explanation videos all about comic book characters. Number 8. Nkonthu the Living Mummy. Nkonthu was the leader of a very strong tribe in the Sub-Sahara that was enslaved by the Egyptians around 3,000 years ago. After he led a revolt against the pharaoh and even took the pharaoh's life with a spear, Nkonthu was paralyzed by the pharaoh's sorcerer and mummified, but made immortal so as to suffer as a living mummy. Now, fast forward to the 20th century and the living mummy regained the ability to move again, and he clawed his way out of his slumber and terrorized Cairo until he was eventually seemingly defeated. Only not really, because he came back. The living mummy has actually acted as a hero as well. Quite a bit, honestly, helping out on many teams using his super strength, stamina, and durability, plus a form of immortality that doesn't let him die from anything except some physical attacks. Also, after being charged by Anubis, Nkonthu has apparently gained the ability to draw souls from sentient beings. Number 7. Spider-Man and Mary Jane. Spider-Man is arguably the face of Marvel Comics, and for good reason too. He's incredibly inspiring, full of hope, and is never one to give up. For all those reasons, when Spider-Man Reign was released in 2007, it was incredibly hard to see an old, tired, and torn down Peter Parker who had pretty much given up. Of all the dark and depressing things in this story, there is one thing that stands above the rest. So, through the course of the story, we learn that Mary Jane, Peter Parker's greatest love interest, has passed away, and he's been hanging on to this memory of her, and that's likely due to the fact that he is directly responsible. Mary Jane didn't pass away because of a villain or Peter failing to save her. Instead, because of the radioactive spider that gave him his abilities, Peter himself was radioactive. Through the years and years that Peter Parker and Mary Jane had been together, Peter's radioactive body had essentially given Mary Jane cancer. We learn this as Peter is hugging her decaying body and bawling his eyes out. It's honestly utterly gut-wrenching. Number 6. Green Goblin and Gwen Stacy. Sticking with Spider-Man, because apparently putting Spider-Man through the ringer is Marvel's speciality, we have Sins Past. In this story, it was revealed that Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, who was a full-grown man at the time, had actually had an affair with the teenage Spider-Man's other love interest, Gwen Stacy. Not only that, but Norman actually knocked her up with twins. Norman whisked Gwen off to France so that she could give birth, but filled with guilt, Gwen decided to come clean and tell Peter Parker everything. But Norman was absolutely not going to allow that to happen, which was the reason that the Green Goblin, who had barely ever shared any comic time with Gwen Stacy before this point, chose to infamously put her life in peril, and it's the whole reason she lost her life in the first place. It's incredibly unnecessary and completely tears down the memory of Gwen. Number 5. Sentry and Ares. The Sentry is a character that deserves more light. The problem is he is kind of the most powerful superhero Marvel has. Obviously that's debatable, but this guy has the power to destroy pretty much anybody in the Marvel universe. For example, he has reassembled his own molecules and taken out the Molecule Man. But it's the fight between the Sentry and Ares, the literal god of war, in issue 2 of Siege that really left me sitting there going, did that actually just happen? Through the course of the story, Ares has been showing just how awesome he is, and he turns his sights on Norman Osborn, which unfortunately means Ares now has to face his friend, the Sentry. Sentry punches Ares halfway across Asgard, and maybe 2 or 3 punches later, he grabs both ends of the God of War and rips him completely in half. Not only did it leave everyone on the page frozen, it also left readers completely stunned. Number 4. The Hulk and Tigra. In 1995, Marvel released The Last Avengers Story, and with a title like that, from 1995, you can imagine it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Side note, the art in this comic is actually really good, which actually made it worse watching this version of the Incredible Hulk turn against his fellow Avengers, Wonder Man, Hawkeye, Mockingbird, and Tigra. Tigra against the Hulk is not a fight you would normally expect, and this Hulk tells you why, as in her attack against the Green Goliath, Hulk simply grabs her and pulls her apart just like Sentry did with Ares. Number 3. The Punisher. The Punisher could probably make up almost every single spot on this list, but that wouldn't make a very compelling collection of horrible moments, now would it? No. So, I'm going to pick just one. Punisher, being a regular guy, has to come up with some pretty inventive ways of dispatching criminals and super criminals. Usually that involves weaponry, but he's tossed a guy to a great white shark or to the wolves in a zoo, he's disintegrated the Hulk with magic, and even smothered a guy with a much larger guy. A close second is when he took down the Wolverine by parking a steamroller on top of him, but number 1 would have to be when he faced the entire Marvel universe. In this alternate world, it's a superhero battle, not crime, that brings a close to his family. Because of that, Frank Castle took down everyone. It's the final fight with Daredevil though that really hits. It's a slogfest, and Frank doesn't realize what he's done till Matt Murdock pulls off his mask before he passes on, which prompts Frank to turn on himself, leaving us readers feeling completely distraught. Number 2. Ultimatum. The Marvel Ultimate Universe. An ultimate collection of bizarre choices, really. Chief among them would have to be the event that was supposed to bring the universe to an end, but instead just did a whole bunch of really brutal stuff. And then it just kind of carries on. I'm talking about Ultimatum. In this event, Magneto, lacking any of his 616 universe counterpart's moral compass, flips the magnetic poles of the Earth. Now this causes incredibly bad weather, tidal waves, and the de-lifing of millions of people. But if that wasn't bad enough, in the ensuing chaos caused by the Ultimatum wave, the Blob devours Janet Van Dyne, Hank Pym in his giant form chomps the Blob's head off for revenge, Captain America ends up on life support, Thor trades his life and soul for Valkyrie, Valkyries in the Land of the Dead, Magneto uses Iron Man's and Cyclops' power to brutally obliterate Wolverine, and then Magneto screams and raves until Cyclops blows his head off with an I-beam. It was all just a lot. And in at number 1 is Marvel Ruins. If you know Marvel Ruins, then you had to know that this was going to be number 1. This is a story taking place in an alternate comic book universe where literally everything that could go wrong goes wrong. Similar to Ultimatum, it's just kinda best to list off the events rather than get specific here. The Fantastic Four's spacecraft crashes into Earth and Ben Grimm is left with survivor's guilt. The Incredible Hulk is not so incredible as the gamma radiation he experienced leaves him as a hulking mass of tumors and deformity. Thanks to the radioactive spider, Spider-Man did not gain the abilities of a spider, but instead developed an incredibly brutal mutant virus that left him with a terrible skin rash and had him captured and quarantined by the government. The Scarlet Witch betrayed the Avengers to the government, leading to the Quinjet being blown up with them all inside of it. Nick Fury was introduced to the idea of eating other people by Captain America. Silver Surfer suffocated in space. Johnny Blaze sets himself on fire as a stunt and goes out in the same stunt, and Magneto's powers go out of control in an airport. The whole story just leaves you wondering what you're supposed to do with your life now.
Number 10. Undead Brother Voodoo. This version of Brother Voodoo hails from Earth 666, ooh spooky, where he is part of the Undead Avengers team. While still technically a hero, he's also still technically a monster. The Avengers of Earth 666 are all considered members of the Undead, with each of them technically being some kind of monster, some version of Undead, if you will. Jericho Drumm in this universe appears to be some kind of poltergeist-like ghost from his appearance here. I don't know if he's specifically a poltergeist, I just think of him that way because of his glowiness. I don't know, reminds me of the movie Poltergeist. This team, including the ghostly Brother Voodoo, make their first appearance in issue number 33 of the Secret Avengers series, where they tangle with Secret Avengers members Captain Britain and Clint Barton's Hawkeye of Earth 616.
Number 9. Groot. Before he was the mainstay lovable space ent in Guardians of the Galaxy with a raccoon-shaped compatriot, Groot was actually an evil, monstrous tree. He first appeared in Tales to Astonish number 13 in 1960. The tagline in the comic itself was, quote, "Where Groot walks, death follows." He was also entirely obscure before being thrust into the pop culture fandom when Marvel decided to turn their C-list team, Guardians of the Galaxy, into a phenomenally massive success. He was originally a throwaway monster, and his original comic, before 2012, was worth $2,868, which isn't small by any means, but after the movies premiered, it was worth $19,000. In the comic, Groot belongs to a species called Floral Colossus, although they're also just called Groots too. During his early life, the Floral Colossi rule over Planet X, and Groot was an outcast amongst his people. He became friends with the inferior species called the Undergrowth, a fungi-like species also on the planet. Groot is eventually forced to flee his homeworld after he kills another Colossus while defending an Undergrowth. Before the movies, Groot also appeared in 2 other comics, one being The Incredible Hulk, where he more so resembles his original appearance rather than the huggable tree we know today. The Hulk comic released in 1976, and then lastly he was in Annihilation Conquest number 6 in 2008. It was the first appearance of Groot as his modern rendition, smaller, skinnier, a bit more approachable than the Godzilla-style tree we knew before. He also joined the Guardians of the Galaxy lineup in this comic alongside Star-Lord, Drax the Destroyer, and Rocket Raccoon.
Number 8. Ultimate Hulk. Let's be real, when I think of multiversal monster versions of the Hulk, I often think of Ultimate Hulk of Earth 1610, aka the Ultimate Universe. Here Hulk was less a hero and more just, kind of a brute. In fact, at one point the Ultimates, who are basically this Earth's version of the Avengers, even had to fight against, not with the Hulk. The Hulk would eventually go on to join the Ultimates team, I'll give him that, but let's not forget that he's a cannibalistic beast who also makes some of the most violent threats when he's angry. Even Bruce Banner wasn't as altruistic in this universe, initially hoping to create the next super soldier serum so that he might be able to increase his own strength and power. However, instead he created a Hulk serum, which turned him into the Hulk because he was all about testing that serum on himself. It's even implied that during his first transformation that he may have actually caused the death of Mary and Richard Parker, the parents of Spider-Man. Peter Parker, so yeah.
Number 7. Sauron. Calling him a monster is a little unfair, but also not really. As a child, Dr. Carl Lycos was attacked by a mutated pterodon and somehow became an energy vampire, forced to absorb the life energy from animals and humans in order to survive. However, after absorbing energy from the mutant Havoc, the energy triggered his metamorphosis into a creature that resembled a half-humanoid pterodon, who retained his human intelligence and the ability to speak. However, the transformation distorted Lycos' personality, turning him evil. Hence, Lycos took the name Sauron after the arch-villain of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. He has come into many conflicts and alliances with various mutants, including the X-Men over his history, and he eventually became conqueror of the Savage Land, which is a hidden refuge for dinosaurs nestled in the modern Antarctic. Number 6. Morbius. Yes, it is indeed Morbin time, my friends. As probably one of the most frequently occurring and now most memed Marvel monsters, Michael Morbius is a prominent figure for monsters and mystical beings in Marvel Comics. Suffering from a rare blood disease, Morbius turned to a cure that used vampire bat DNA. Now this mutated him into a blood-sucking creature of the night and a pseudo-vampire, with all the perks of vampirism minus the drawback, except for looking utterly terrifying. He was at first a villain doing battle against the likes of Spider-Man and of course Blade, but he eventually became a conflicted hero, using his abilities to help others while battling his bloodlust and trying to cure himself of his curse.
Number 5. The U-Men. The mutants of the Marvel Universe have had a pretty rough go of it, being subjected to many atrocities due to the prejudices of the humans that despise them. Usually the humans are convinced that the mutants are dangerous and desire their extermination, so they can take their place as the next step in evolution, which makes the humans try to exterminate them first. Other comics explore how the mutant hate doesn't really make a lot of sense, as the humans will praise the superpowered beings until they find out that they're mutants, at which point they will turn against them. However, some of the humans hate the mutants out of sheer jealousy. For example, the Homo Perfectus movement, which are humans who believe that they are mutants stuck in human bodies and wish to undergo surgery to empower themselves with mutant powers. There was a cult-like faction of the group called the U-Men who swore against ever having contact with the impure world until they had had their powers, and wore containment suits until they could be transformed. The way the U-Men went about this was by traveling the country and capturing mutants who they would then harvest organs and body parts from in order to empower their members. Life for mutants is hard enough, but being captured by an insane cult with a military budget who want to dissect you and steal your body parts in a crazy quest to steal your powers is one of the worst, as it is a painful and demeaning way to go, as in the words of their leader, John Sublime, to them, mutants are just livestock.
Number 4. Daken. What's worse than being livestock? Being Daken's livestock, I guess. If Wolverine is the best at what he does, Daken is the one who simply enjoys what he does a little too much. Daken is a trained killer, and we get to see this side of him on full display during his fight against the Punisher during Dark Reign. It was during this era of Marvel that we saw Norman Osborn take over as leader of the Avengers after S.H.I.E.L.D. was no more, and he was basically put in charge of his very own organization, which he named HAMMER, an acronym that stands for, well, nothing really. Osborn just liked the sound of it. During this time, working for Osborn, the Dark Avengers were given a list of targets for them to remove, them to get rid of. One such person on that list was Frank Castle. This death is also what we'd call overkill. Daken not only tears Frank apart and runs him through with his claws multiple times, but in the end, he also removes his head. Of course, Frank wouldn't straight up die, but instead would later return as the undead Frankencastle, but regardless, I still think this would be a terrible way to go.
Number 3. Miss Arrow. When Spider-Man was killed by Morlun in the Others event, his body was put in a cocoon under the Brooklyn Bridge until he returned to life. He shed his skin, and this skin was taken over by a bunch of spiders, who formed a being called Arrow, who was intent on killing Spider-Man once and for all. Arrow began going by Miss Arrow, and she tried to impregnate Flash Thompson with an egg sac that would give birth to thousands of her offspring, but was stopped by a shotgun-wielding Betty Brant. Miss Arrow tried to escape, but Spider-Man pursued her, eventually managing to force her into the Central Park Zoo's aviary. The various exotic birds were thrilled with the group of spiders before them, and went about eating Miss Arrow one spider at a time as she thrashed and screamed. The birds ate almost every spider, leaving only one left, which Spider-Man promptly stepped on.
Number 2. Sabretooth. While Daken and the U-Men are both pretty terrible, if there was one person I wouldn't want to be killed by in the Marvel Universe, it would probably be Sabretooth. Victor Creed is probably one of the most vicious and evil characters we have in the Marvel Universe. Sure, he's done some heroic stuff before, mainly when his alignment was flipped or if we're talking about alternate realities, but this is a man who legitimately revels in violence usually. When he was sent to the pit in Krakoa as punishment, he used this time to kill all the X-Men and heroes he felt had ever slighted him. In his dreams, of course. This wasn't real, but it was still pretty brutal. And when that was done, he decided to create his own hell, and then plot his own escape, even double-crossing the prisoners that he had planned his escape with. Yeah, Creed has to be one of the worst ways to go, hands down.
Number 1. Deadpool's counter to the healing factor. On Earth 12,101, the X-Men grew tired of Deadpool's instability and insanity and had him committed to the Ravencroft Asylum, hoping that he would be cured of his madness. Unfortunately, his doctor was really a disguised psycho man who was using his position to try and brainwash insane people into doing his bidding. He took away the voices in Wade's head, but they were replaced by a new voice that was telling Deadpool to kill everyone. He became aware of his status as a fictional puppet and went on a killing spree of everyone in the Marvel Universe, both hero and villain alike. We get detailed accounts of how he kills the various characters in increasingly brutal and twisted ways, with some highlights being him taking out Thor by growing his hammer with Pym particles so that Thor is crushed underneath it, or trapping the X-Men in an insane death trap. But out of all the fates he subjects the various characters to, I think the worst is what he does to the characters with healing factors. Being a character with a powerful healing factor, Deadpool is uniquely qualified for taking out other such characters, and as Wolverine discovers when he walks into a trap, Deadpool has it all figured out. He has captured Daken and X-23 and left them suspended with a computer-controlled flamethrower. The computer keeps track of their vitals, and every time they come back to life and begin to regenerate, the flamethrowers go off and reduce them to skeletons again. So they are trapped in a continuous cycle of being burnt to death, barely coming back to life, and then immediately being burnt to death again, forever.
Number 10. Mark of Cain. Of the most gruesome ways to go, I think one of the worst would be to get Mark of Cain'd. Cain marked? I don't know if that's really how we say that, but sure. We can say it either of those ways for now, because I don't know what else to call that. Kane Parker is a clone of Peter Parker, of the two main clones we know from the Clone Saga. He was the one who was actually more dramatic and broody. He had long hair and for a while was more of an antagonist, or at least believed to be so. Kane was also known for straight up killing people that got in his way, with his Mark of Cain. What is the Mark of Cain? While initially we kind of thought it was like its own ability, it's actually just Peter's like little hooks that he has on his hands which allow him to stick to stuff, which we actually see in the Raimi-verse pretty close up. Kane would basically put his hand on someone's face and then turn on this sticky ability, which resulted in him seemingly burning the face of his victim. I mean, I don't know if this would actually kill you, but I feel like if this was at all involved in the process of Kane killing me, I would not be interested in that at all. Unless I guess I was already dead. Then I guess I'd kind of be fine with it, because I'd be like, well, I'm not here to feel that, so cool. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe? I know there's a lot of you out there that aren't subscribed, and if you're already subscribed, let me know in the comments.
Number 9. Man-Thing. In 1971, Marvel introduced Man-Thing. He was a scientist named Ted Sallis trying to create his own version of the super soldier serum before being attacked by criminals who wanted to steal his work. To keep the formula secret, Ted injected himself with the serum before getting in a car accident that caused his car to crash into a magic swamp. The serum and the magic caused him to transform into a big green swamp monster who was able to control plant life as well as a host of other abilities. One of his powers is to sense human emotion, with him having different reactions to different feelings. Fear sends Man-Thing into a fit of rage, and when he senses it, his body automatically secretes a corrosive acid-like agent that will burn anyone he touches. Hence the series tagline, "Whatever knows fear burns at the Man-Thing's touch." Now, I don't know about you, but if I came across a creature like Man-Thing, it would be difficult not to be afraid. So I really don't know how well I would do, and the idea of being grabbed by such a beast and burned to death because he's mad that I'm afraid sounds like a rough way to go.
Number 8. Impaled. Shout out to Eric Curse in the comments on our part 3 for this one. Sugarman is a character I hadn't thought of for some time, but being killed by him would certainly not be fun. He is another mad geneticist type, my favorite kind of villain. Definitely not a villain I'd ever want to run into, mad geneticist types. Except for, I would say, Mr. Sinister. I think I could actually maybe befriend Mr. Sinister at least. But as I said, in general, these are usually the worst when it comes to meeting your end. And like some others on our list, Sugarman is pretty fond of impaling. Sugarman does this in issue number 4 of Generation Next with his tongue, actually killing one of his own guards, Quietus, when he suspects that someone is attempting to basically infiltrate his power station. Sugarman hails from the reality known as Age of Apocalypse, aka Earth 295, but he eventually makes his way to the main reality of Earth 616. Number 7. Whispers. Black Bolt is someone you probably never want to get too close to if you were in the Marvel Universe, unless you were someone who was completely certain they were safe from ever-angering Blackagar, I guess. And then again, you'd still probably want to be a little cautious considering that Black Bolt could sneeze and accidentally kill you, especially if you were a squishy human as both you and I are right now. Or are we? Well, I'm assuming you're a human. If you're an alien or a mutant, leave an alien, or there's no mutant emojis, leave an X emoji in the comments so we can get a clear sense for how many off-world nerds and how many mutant nerds we have watching this video right now. Black Bolt has merely gone up to someone, whispered into their ear, and obliterated them in the past, and I gotta be honest, it doesn't sound like the most pleasant way to go. It doesn't sound like the most pleasant way to go. Haha! I didn't even realize I did that, but there it is. Pun accidental, but intended for sure. Number 6. Kissed goodbye and tossed into the sun. That was how The Void went in issue number 8 of the second volume of Sentry. The Void is basically the dark reflection of Robert Reynolds' Sentry. Sentry is a superhero from Marvel whose powers make him comparable to Superman in terms of the sheer strength he possesses. He is said to have the power of 1 million burning suns, but apparently it only took one sun to defeat the Void, at least this time around. The Void of course would return because he's kind of like always gonna come back in some way. Still, I think getting thrown into the sun after being kissed goodbye by your good alter ego is a pretty wild way to go. Also, would that not be terrible for you as the Sentry? We don't see it on panel, but like I kind of have to imagine it would feel a little bit like burning half of yourself away, as the Void is meant to represent the darker side and temptation of Bob's power. Sentry is both Sentry and the Void, so yeah. Also, what would that fight look like if you were just like watching it in space? Does it just look like the Sentry like fighting himself? Probably not. It's probably like an actual shadow entity, but it would be kind of funny if it was him fighting himself. Number 5. Shallow water. Oh boy, this is not just a terrible way to go in terms of physically what is happening here, but also in terms of the emotional stakes that are involved in this one. We're talking about the death of Daken. I know in part 3 of this series we talked about how awful it would be to be killed by Daken, but at the same time, this story kinda makes me feel for him. Daken is the son of Wolverine, who was basically manipulated into hating and resenting his dad since he was a kid. At one point, the two are pitted against one another by Sabretooth, and Wolverine is forced to take him out, using one of a few weaknesses that both he and his son share: water. Ugh. Wolverine drowns Daken in a puddle as we get a vision, a dream, if you will, of what life could have been like were Daken actually raised by his biological parents, Logan and Itsu. This death wouldn't stick, and now we know Daken as the anti-hero Akahiro, his given name, but that doesn't make it any less tragic or awful. This was still a pretty terrible thing that happened. Number 4. Heartless. So admittedly, the way Magneto went was pretty epic, but at the same time sounds like it would be immensely painful and stressful were you to be in his shoes. Magneto ended up being perma-killed, or at least perma-killed for now, I guess we could say. Might be forever, but probably just for now. On Mars, aka planet Arakko, while helping to defend the planet and its Iraqi mutant population against Uranos. Or at least that was the beginning of his end, I should say. Uranos ripped out Magneto's heart and left him for dead, but through sheer will, Eric used his Master of Magnetism powers to keep his blood pumping through his body, and ended up continuing on. He even got in a rematch with Uranos with a shockingly fantastic assist from Storm. Oh, such a good moment. In the end, Uranos was defeated, but Magneto was left dead. I can't even imagine fighting Uranos on a good day, never mind doing it while heartless and maintaining my own life support. Also, if you missed when this happened, you want to go check out AXE Judgment Day, or Axe Judgment Day, which is also a pretty fun event, I will say. I enjoyed it. Number 3. Becoming Ultron. If you've been watching Top 10 Nerd and the content I make over here for a while, then you'll likely know that one of my biggest fears is possession. So needless to say, this is one that gets me. For this demise, we're talking about the complete eradication of Hank Pym, which is awful, especially in the sense that when it happened, we didn't even really understand that Pym had actually died. Hank Pym at one point ends up being merged with his evil creation, Ultron. Ultron forces the two of them to merge together, and something new is made, this hybrid being identified as Ultron Pym, and for a while we actually believed that this entity was both Hank and Ultron together. However, we'd later learn in the Tony Stark Iron Man series that Hank had actually died when this happened, and that the version of him that seemed to exist still within Ultron Pym was actually nothing more than a simulation. In other words, Ultron Pym is just Ultron walking around in like a Hank Pym skin suit, which is horrifying to think about. Number 2. Cassandra Nova. Cassandra Nova is definitely someone you don't want to mess with if you're in the Marvel Universe. In fact, you probably just don't even want to meet her. You probably just want to stay far away from her. She's basically the evil twin of Professor X, who is known for being just as powerful as he is, if not more powerful sometimes, and definitely a lot more evil. She has taken people out in a variety of horrible different ways, but I think one of the worst was definitely Donald Trask's ending. I don't even know how to describe what happens to Donald Trask in issue number 115 of the new X-Men. Nova basically copies his DNA and then like phases her hands through him. Although I imagine this is happening psychically, or that it's meant to be what's implied here. But with Nova, I mean, you never really know. This could be psychically, or it could be physically, or it could be both. This could be some kind of telekinetic trick of hers where she literally does manage to put her hands physically through your head to kill you. I mean, Nova's a telepath, not really like a telekinetic, but I would believe if she was like, also I'm that too. I would believe that she just psionically is on a whole other level. Either way, ouch. What's worse is she was of course copying Trask's DNA so that she could gain the ability to control and command the Sentinel army. Ugh. Number 1. Dire Wraith. Big thanks to Canon Ranger for this suggestion. Goodness, are Dire Wraiths frightening. Touché. These creatures basically assimilate you, allowing them to adapt to your shape and even absorb your knowledge and memories that you've gained throughout your time living. They do this by piercing your skull with their barbed tongue and basically sucking all that knowledge and brain juice out of your noggin. In the process, you shrivel and pretty quickly die. Yikes. I don't know about you, but this is not a way that I would like to go. I feel like the idea of anyone sticking their tongue into my skull just, yeah, that sounds nasty in like the worst way possible. This also really plays on my fear of possession, because after killing you, the Dire Wraith can then kind of like adopt your form and then use it to get close to your loved ones and, you know, possibly also, which would terrify me in my last moments of life to think about that.
Number 10. Sideburn the Regenerating Planet. When Galactica, the daughter of Galactus, is looking for her next meal in issue 1 of her self-titled comic, she finds Earth, a lovely little snack. But while looking at her dinner option, she comes upon Wolverine. Realizing his mutant regenerative abilities, she formulates an idea of using a bit of his harvested DNA with a bit of celestial power to create Sideburn the Regenerating Planet, a planet-sized Galactus meal that would grow back after each feasting. The perfect unlimited food source that would give her billions of years of meals. Unfortunately, she just as quickly realizes that a planet made up of Canadian mutant DNA like this would be highly unstable. Unfortunate, because I'd love to see this guy floating through the galaxy of the regular Marvel Universe.
Number 9. Cancerous Professor X. In the alternate universe of Earth 10,011, otherwise known as the Cancerverse, death was defeated by life and the ancient eldritch beings known as the Many-Angled One. The heroes of this Earth began to worship the Many-Angled Ones, who transformed the heroes, granting them new powers, but also corrupting and mutating them due to the Many-Angled Ones' demonic natures. One of the consequences of this was that many of the heroes became deformed by cancerous tumors running amok. Although many of the X-Men were affected, such as Wolverine, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and Storm, the most terrifying of these beings was Professor X, who developed a massive cranium as well as multiple glowing red eyes. Now, Professor X can be pretty creepy at the best of times, but this is taking it to a whole other level.
Number 8. Franken Castle. After he was taken out by Daken on orders from Norman Osborn during the Dark Reign event, Frank Castle, yes, the Punisher, was revived by the Legion of Monsters as an undead zombie-like monster known as Franken-Castle. The Legion resurrected Frank to recruit him in their fight against the villain known as Hellsguard, who was systematically killing off monsters using samurai-like assassins. Although he originally refused, Frank got involved after seeing innocent child monsters being dispatched as well, and that is not something Frank is willing to abide. He went on to slay hordes of Hellsguard's men. It's honestly an incredibly interesting moment in Frank Castle's history, and it got this version of Frank moved to Earth 666. He also nearly enacted revenge against Daken, being stopped by Wolverine before he was returned to his human form through the Bloodstone. Number 7. Blue Goo. Maybe this is more just really weird as opposed to a horrible moment, but thanks to sci-fi writer Orson Scott Card of Ender's Game fame, we got a version of Iron Man who, due to a virus that led to the passing of his mother and affected Tony upon his birth, lives in constant pain unless he's coated in this really strange blue goo created by his father, which was developed as a sort of bio armor. It does the trick, but it's still rather odd, and fans were not fans of this change. Personally, I think a lot of the changes made to Iron Man's backstory in the Ultimate Universe were really interesting, and it was different from 616, which made it fun, but the blue skin was an interesting choice to say the least. This point is a little unfair as Marvel decided to retcon this out of his history, but that don't change the fact that it did indeed happen, and it was rather strange too. Number 6. Hulk eating people. The Incredible Hulk has always sort of tiptoed the line between being a hero and being a monster. In the 616 universe, we can more often than not say he is a hero, but in the Ultimate Universe, not a chance. For starters, his origin already starts Bruce Banner off on a bad foot. He is made to feel inferior by both his ex and other heroes, which is what spurs him to become the Hulk in order to feel bigger, I guess? Sounds like a supervillain to me. That's because he basically is. After he transforms, he goes on a rampage through New York, taking out more than 800 people and even eating some of them. Sure, the idea haunts Bruce, which we learn in the Ultimate Hulk solo comic as he recounts the feeling of eating a person, but there isn't really a redemption here. Also, what the hell is up with the whole Freddie Prinze Jr. thing? It's hilarious, but what? Number 5. Lack of Sabretooth. Sabretooth has always been a pretty terrifying dude. He ain't nice, he's extremely violent and extremely hard to bring down. And even more so in the Ultimate Universe, he becomes bonded with adamantium similar to Wolverine and even has retractable bone claws out of his forearms, also like Wolverine. Doesn't really need them, as he also eventually has his naturally occurring claws on each fingertip as well as his fangs and teeth laced with adamantium to just bump up the amount of absolutely bloody carnage he can produce. If this sounds awesomely terrifying, it's because it is, which makes it a shame when he doesn't really do much. Sabretooth in the Ultimate Universe, similar to 616, is kind of just a lackey to Weapon X and then later to Magneto. It just feels wrong to make such an imposing villain more imposing but not give him much to do. Number 4. Sabretooth versus Angel. Oh, actually, there is one thing of note here that Sabretooth does. One thing that was incredibly brutal and unnecessary in true Ultimate Universe fashion. In the aftermath of Magneto's ultimatum wave, he and Sabretooth waited in the Arctic for the heroes to come and try to apprehend them in Ultimatum issue number 4 from 2009. The first to arrive was Warren Worthington III, or Angel, who came crashing through a window with a punch straight to Magneto's big old face. But after Magneto gave the go-ahead, Sabretooth pounced at the crash-landed mutant, scratching the living hell out of his back, tore off one of his wings with his teeth, seeming to enjoy the brief cannibalism, and then stomped on Warren's neck with his boot, taking out the mutant in another of the Ultimate Universe's unceremonious dispatching of a fan-loved character. Thanks, Ultimate Universe! Thank you so much. Number 3. Dormammu and Doctor Strange. Speaking of unceremonious dispatching, Angel wasn't the only hero to meet his end in issue number 4 of Ultimatum. Right at the beginning of the comic, it seems that the Hulk's rampaging has led to Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum, and he begins just smashing everything, including magical items, which results in a blinding flash of light. Next thing we know, the dread Dormammu is free from the dark dimension and is in magical conflict with Doctor Strange. But Dormammu seems more than confident that he won't be defeated by the Sorcerer. It takes merely a few pages before Dormammu uses the Sorcerer Supreme's own sash, belt, cloak thingy, constricting it around Strange's body so tightly that it explodes his head in an extremely grotesque couple of panels that I'm not sure we're even allowed to show. Just like that, the normally extremely powerful Dr. Stephen Strange is out of the picture. Number 2. Hawkeye's family tragedy. Say what you will about the ultimate version of Clint Barton. He is much less heroic than his 616 counterpart, he is a S.H.I.E.L.D. sponsored killer, and he is much more of a secret agent. Ultimately, he is the basis for the MCU's version of the character, from his look to his family. But what the Ultimate Universe did to his family, or more specifically what Black Widow did to them, I should say, will likely never be seen in the MCU, which we should all thank our lucky stars for. As we talked about all the way up at the 10th point, Natalia Romanova did not turn out to be a great gal. She was working for the Liberators, a group of heroes from around the globe who were opposed to the amount of power held by the United States thanks to S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Ultimates. It was a cool, realistic concept, and one that could have opened up the comics to more worldwide inclusiveness. Instead, it was kind of just a way to make America seem superior. After Natalia's revelation as a traitor, she organized the assassination of her longtime Black Ops partner Hawkeye's entire family, even personally taking out his son Callum. For her crimes, Clint does put an arrow between her eyes in Ultimates 2's final chapter as she is in a hospital bed thanks to Tony Stark giving her brain damage. It doesn't really help the whole situation. And in at number 1, Peter Parker comes back to life. One of the key things about the Ultimate Universe was supposed to be its realism, or at least its realism in a universe full of superheroes, sorcerers, gods, and monsters. One of the aspects of said realism was the fact that death would be permanent, which is about as real as you can get. The only problem was that didn't seem to last. One of the best things about the Ultimate Universe was Ultimate Spider-Man. It's regarded as not only the best thing out of that universe, but one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told. His eventual death after saving many people in Ultimatum, taking a bullet for Captain America, and then fighting and defeating Norman Osborn and the Six was equally as amazing, if not tragic and emotional. It also paved the way for another one of the Ultimate Universe's best, Miles Morales. So in order to make that amazing story and all the emotional weight it had going for it mean absolutely nothing, what do you know? Peter Parker wakes up in some underground laboratory, seemingly revived. Yay! Coming in at number 10 is Frankenstein's monster. In case you have never heard of Frankenstein's monster, the creature was originally the creation of English author Mary Shelley, who wrote a novel in 1818 titled Frankenstein that tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, a young scientist who creates a sentient undead creature in a scientific experiment. It's actually a very deep and somewhat moving story. Now, the Marvel Universe version of Frankenstein and his monster isn't too different. In 1788, Victor Frankenstein left his family estate in Geneva, Switzerland to study natural science. Victor became obsessed with the idea of recreating life and began robbing graveyards in order to acquire body parts that he then stitched together and subjected to chemical treatments and electrolysis. But it horrified the scientist and he fled, leaving the monster alone in the world. Frankenstein, being an undead being, is essentially immortal and immune to disease. He can lift around 10 tons, he has superhuman stamina and durability, and he can replace any lost limbs with other people's limbs, which is both creepy and kinda cool. Number 9. Vampire by Night. I honestly didn't know there was also a Vampire by Night, and she's actually related to the Werewolf by Night. Nina Price, the niece of Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night, is also an ancestor of Grigory Russoff. Nina's mother, Lisa Russell, was a victim of the same curse as Jack Russell, except things changed for this branch of the family when an altercation with a sorcerer named Glitter Knight freed Lissa from being a werewolf. Lissa married and had Nina with a wealthy man named Mr. Price. Unfortunately, the werewolf curse continued to Nina, but at some point, Nina was attacked by a vampire, which altered the curse for Nina and caused her to be both a werewolf and vampire in one. By day, Nina Price seemed to be a normal human, but once the sun goes down, she becomes a vampire, which is a good way of getting around the whole sunburning weakness. Due to the werewolf's curse though, Nina does become a white wolf during the full moon, but she uses her father's money and status to reserve a zoo or park, caging herself there until the full moon was over and she was no longer an animal. However, Nina had no problem using her supernatural abilities to harm criminals. Rightfully so. Nerds, if you are enjoying this video, I call upon you to hit the like button. It is all you have to do to show us your support here at Top 10 Nerd. Number 8. Reptile. While accompanying his parents on an archaeological dig, Humberto Lopez and his family discovered a fossilized amulet. Humberto eventually took possession of this fossil, which activated one day when a rock slide occurred, nearly burying him. Berto ran as fast as he could, and once he was far away, he noticed that his legs had transformed into those of a dinosaur. That's because the amulet that Berto and his family discovered was magically created by the Hag of the Pits to imbue its bearer with the abilities of prehistoric animals as well as empathic communication with them to defend said animals when the time came. His powers were also later augmented with Pym particles to allow him to alter his size. Now originally, Reptile could only transform certain parts of his body into different aspects of dinosaurs, like the wings of a pterodactyl, the tail of a stegosaurus, the head of a parasaur, and the legs of a velociraptor, that kind of thing. He could also only maintain one transformation at a time. He could even just enhance his senses like vision and hearing, but eventually Reptile was able to fully transform into a complete dinosaur or even other prehistoric animals like insects, which gave him enhanced healing.
Number 7. Marvel Zombies. It's an entire pantheon of characters, from Spider-Man to Hulk to Captain America, but all zombified. The zombie versions of beloved heroes were first introduced in the pages of Ultimate Fantastic Four and became instant hits. In typical Marvel marketing genius, Marvel spun the zombies into their own book written by none other than Robert Kirkman. Robert Kirkman is the same bearded guy behind a television show you might know called The Walking Dead. The comics ran from December 2005 to April 2006. It starts in an alternate Earth called Earth 2149, where an unknown hero crash lands from another dimension. He comes with a quote, hunger, which infects the Avengers, the X-Men, and the Fantastic Four, along with basically every other major superhero you can think of. It's intense, and the adventures of the zombie heroes usually have more mayhem than most mainstream comics do in their entire run. It's all about damage and impact, and oh boy does Kirkman deliver on that. Peter Parker eats Aunt May. I'm serious, look it up. After an episode of the Disney Plus series called What If Zombies, there were talks of Disney also creating a spin-off series based on and named after the Marvel Zombies, so keep an eye out.
Number 6. The Yeti. This Yeti is relegated to another universe because of the series it appears in, which was intended to be, good for young readers and children, and which was said to exist outside of the main continuity. This Yeti we are talking about here appears in Spidey Super Stories in issue 16. Oh boy. In this team-up book, we see Spider-Man go on adventures that are more kid-friendly when it comes to reading, ideally therefore serving the purpose of helping kids learn how to read, which is important. The Yeti hails from Earth of 57780, and while he might seem like a monster by the end of the story, Spider-Man, also of Earth 57780, seems to have ascertained that the Yeti really is not a bad guy, but is just homesick. He's just stealing a lot of ice cream. So he attempts to help the Yeti by getting him safely home so he can be cold again. Yay. Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? One of my personal favorites and definitely a dark story. This one involves Spider-Man being fully overtaken by his black suit after Reed attempts to remove it. In the end, Peter is drained of his life energy by the suit, which does inevitably leave him. Prematurely aged by this process, he ends up dying of old age, with Black Cat being the one to get revenge for Peter by killing the symbiote for good. It also features a very sad scene between May and old Peter, who poses as a colleague of Peter's from the Daily Bugle and basically comes to tell Aunt May before he dies how much Peter loved her. This sad and tragic what-if tale comes from issue number 4 of the 1989 comic series, if you would like to revisit it, as I have. Number 4. What if the Hulk had killed Wolverine? This story comes to us from issue number 50 of the first volume of the Marvel What If series. Here, Wolverine and the Hulk fight, as, you know, is common, but this time, during their, what I believe is intended to be their first fight, Wolverine ends up dead. This is all because Hulk is being used as a pawn by Forge's powerful nemesis, the Adversary. Very creative name, the Adversary. I wonder what that guy's about. Is he an adversary? He certainly is. In the end, Hulk threatens the lives of pretty much all of the X-Men, but does not end up killing them all. Once the Adversary reveals himself, Hulk attacks him, weakening him briefly, just long enough for Forge and Storm to basically escape his clutches. They strike back against him, and with Forge managing to cast a spell to defeat the Adversary and basically seals the Adversary off in another realm, banishing him from their reality for good. Still, while there are survivors of this battle, when Hulk transforms back to Bruce Banner, Bruce is confronted with the fact that he has taken multiple lives during this rampage, and that pretty much breaks Bruce, so I would say this is pretty tragic. Number 3. What if the Punisher had killed Spider-Man? This comic has maybe one of the darkest endings around. In it, Punisher is tricked into killing Spider-Man. He's promised basically funds to help him in his fight against crime and those who took his family from him, and Frank is also made to believe that Spider-Man himself is a criminal and is not actually a hero. However, after killing Spider-Man, Frank learns the truth. He manages to track down the man who misguided him, the Jackal, aka Professor Miles Warren. He figures out that the Jackal is Warren, and insists that they wait for the cops instead of just, blowing Warren away. However, when the cops do arrive, it's revealed what Frank's real plan is here, to basically kill the Jackal in front of the cops and in return be killed by the cops, believing he deserves himself to be punished for what he did to poor Spider-Man. This all goes down in What If, issue number 58 from the 1989 series. Does seem like a Frank solution to a problem where he blames himself or something. Number 2. What if Flash Thompson became Spider-Man? I was kind of thinking that maybe in this story, Flash, might get a break here. But even here, he has a pretty bleak tale attached to him in another alternate reality where he also becomes Spider-Man instead of Peter Parker. The story culminates in a heated moment where Peter discovers Flash's secret, that he's Spider-Man. Filled with rage, Flash doesn't listen to Peter's pleas for help, and instead blames him for everything that has gone wrong in his life recently, shouting at Peter, "You ruined my life," before hitting him with a deadly punch that basically cost Peter his life. This story comes from the 2018 What If Spider-Man comic, and I would recommend checking this one out. It's wild. Number 1. What if Phoenix had not died? The title for this story makes it sound like it might even be a positive and happy story, but don't be misguided, it's not happy. Well, it starts off pretty optimistic with the Phoenix not dying but being redeemed and even helping to defeat Galactus. In the end, the Dark Phoenix power does consume Jean, causing her to turn on her teammates, so she becomes, dark again. She kills not just the X-Men, but the world in her rage and sorrow, with her anger and fire continuing to spread outward, engulfing the universe. So not only do her friends die, the X-Men obviously, the world, but the universe is also completely in danger, so. Number 10. What if Daredevil killed the Kingpin? That's exactly what happened in issue number 2 of the 1989 series. Following the events of Born Again in this alternate reality, Matt Murdock loses his mind, driven insane as a result of being tormented by Wilson Fisk, which honestly makes sense to me. I know I would be driven insane if all of that stuff happened to me. This causes Matt to take the fight directly to Kingpin, who he simply takes out by shooting him. After this detail is exposed, everyone is basically on his trail, including Punisher and Spider-Man. When Matt goes to beg for Richard Fisk, Wilson's son's, forgiveness, even Hobgoblin gets involved in this fray. While Matt ultimately dies in the fight protecting Richard from Hobgoblin, Richard, in an unexpected twist, ends up carrying on the Daredevil legacy. Which I guess shouldn't be too unexpected if you know about, 2099, where it's kind of what happens in 2099. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why don't you show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? Now, you'd think this would actually be one of the happier what if stories, considering when Spider-Man started out, this was actually one of his dreams to join the FF team, but he was denied it. However, in this universe, they do decide to allow Spider-Man to join them, making his dreams come true, but it actually ends up worse than if they just refused him like they did in the main continuity. I also think that this first issue of What If is pretty important, as it really sets the tone for what these hypothetical comic stories could be, a look into a much darker reality where not everything goes according to plan. But we don't have to really deal with the consequences long term because, these stories are like windows into other more distant worlds, so they don't affect our main world. We can kind of just see I wonder what that world would be like. Terrible? Yep. In issue number 1 of the first volume of What If, Spider-Man ends up joining the Fantastic Four team, which I believe they renamed themselves to the Fantastic Five. Still has a pretty good ring to it, actually. When Susan Storm actually makes the suggestion that, maybe letting him join wouldn't be such a bad idea, so Sue is actually the one that kind of gets him on the team ultimately here. But in the end, this results in her feeling often left out, shunted from this team as a result of Spider-Man's impressive presence. He just completely outdoes Sue, so she feels pretty left out. This causes her in the end to choose to remain with Namor, ultimately leaving the Fantastic Five team, something for which Spider-Man blames himself and which leaves a massive hole in the team and a massive hole in Reed's heart. Number 8. EMP versus Phoenix Force. This has to be one of the most ridiculous ones. The Phoenix is typically known as being an unstoppable, undefeatable entity. I mean, the first time around, the only way that it was able to be defeated was basically by self-sacrifice. However, that hasn't stopped people from somehow banishing it or straight up killing the entity. Case in point, when Magneto defeated Jean Grey as the Phoenix by administering a powerful electromagnetic pulse, which gave her a planetary-sized stroke. Literally, those are the direct words from the comic. That is some major comic stuff right there. Only in comics would that happen.
Number 7. Being a part of X-Statix. Lots of deaths in X-Statix were stupid, but that was the point. The whole thing was a bit of a satire on reality TV. The team itself isn't exactly one of the premier mutant teams out in the world, and that's putting it lightly. The members of the team aren't exactly the most impressive. The original team made up of mutants Zeitgeist, who has the power of Super Puke, La Nuit, who has Dark Force powers, Battering Ram, who was a big purple goat-looking man, Plasm, who had liquidy water powers, Gin Genie, who could create earthquakes depending on how much she drank, and Sluck, who is basically a squid. They went by X-Force, which as you may know shares its name with a much more impressive team. But all those original members, minus 3 of them who I didn't mention, and Sluck, who was blown up by a tank in South Africa, all got completely decimated in spectacularly embarrassing fashion during a rescue mission to save a pop music boy band named Boys R Us. Turns out their demise was actually planned by the team's manager, coach, and its leader, Zeitgeist himself, because they thought a team with a constantly changing roster and high body count would gain them fan interest. The team managed to go on with pretty horrible results. There have been 28 members of X-Statix who have passed away over their history, with only 9 of them surviving. So yeah, don't ever join this team.
Number 6. Eaten by birds. Miss Arrow has a pretty wild death in the comics. For those of you who are unfamiliar or haven't heard of her, that is probably because you know her by a different name, the Other. That is right, Miss Arrow is actually the extremely powerful spider totem entity that is linked to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. As such, she is entirely made up of spiders, despite sometimes appearing to be human while under the guise of Miss Arrow. Because of this, she was at one time killed by a bunch of birds who devoured the spiders that made her up, with Peter squishing the final spider that survived the bird attack. This wouldn't be the end of the Other though, as one more day messed up the whole continuity thanks to reality being warped, with Peter having actually never accepted the Other in this alternate, which is now the main, reality.
Number 5. Being dumb. Magneto in the Ultimate Universe was like the bad guy. He was nuts, and he had the power to back it up, which he proved when he used his abilities to offset the magnetic poles, which put the whole world into chaos. Tidal waves in New York, mega flash freezes in Latveria, volcanoes erupting in the Amazon, all that good stuff. Naturally, the survivors were not happy, and they would be coming after Magneto with a vengeance. They aren't dumb, so of course their attack on the villain would be planned out. Right? Well, it doesn't seem like it was. While all the surviving heroes make their assault on Magneto's fortress, the hot-headed Warren Worthington, you know, the guy whose only power is that he has wings, decides that he is going to jump the gun and come full speed blasting through a window, giving Magneto a good old punch to the face. Magneto could have squashed this guy like a bug in one swift move, but he doesn't even think Angel is worth the effort. Instead, he lets Sabretooth, his mad dog, do the deed. Sabretooth pounces on him, rips one of Warren's wings off with his mouth, and then stomps on the mutant's neck, taking him off the board in one page. Idiot.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you love hearing about weird, dumb deaths, well, we have a lot of weird things for you on our weirdest playlist, so go check that out. It's full of weirdness. Number 4. Waking up Fin Fang Foom. Something you shouldn't ever do? Wake up a sleeping dragon. As Jerry Carpenter learned in Hulk vs. Fin Fang Foom issue number 1, which admittedly is a pretty wild and weird story, so if you're into that, you should go check it out. Here, as promised, the two beings end up fighting. But first, we're treated to a story clearly inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing. Probably also why this guy's named Jerry Carpenter. You see what's happening here? Except Fin Fang Foom is the shapeshifter in this tale. For those who don't know, Fin Fang Foom is actually an alien whose race is actually known for their shapeshifting abilities. I feel like not a lot of people think about that, but that is a thing. Needless to say, Jerry finds Foom below the ice and sends for the rest of his team up in the Arctic. They're basically like a research team, but instead of just waiting, he is hasty to proceed because he basically wants to name this newfound finding of what he believes is an undiscovered type of dinosaur after himself. He smashes through the ice with a pick, only to awaken Foom. Foom blasts forth and takes Carpenter for his host. basically wearing him like a skin suit. The really weird thing though is I think this is the only case of Foom like actually needing to do this. He claims he's attempting to rebuild his strength by merging with hosts and is like looking for a real strong host when he runs into the Hulk, but I don't think he's ever actually needed to do that before or after this point ever again. And he can just shapeshift on his own. He doesn't actually need a human host to turn into a human, so there's a lot of weird stuff happening in this comic. But hey, if you gotta make Hulk and Foom fight, I guess you gotta do some weird stuff.
Number 3. Falling on Rogue. Nothing stands up to falling on a woman who leeches life away, unable to pick herself up. Well, falling isn't the right word. It was more like Mr. Sinister was held down. Following the events of M-Day, a mutant named Hope Summers is born, bringing hope to the mutant species. Well, Mr. Sinister, he reassembled the Marauders and planned to control the future of mutant kind by stealing Hope. Sinister knew this and wanted to use Hope to control the mutant population because the mutants can't just have something without a villain trying to mess it all up. Sinister regrouped his Marauders alongside Mystique, who knew that Hope was necessary to save her daughter, Rogue, from her out-of-control powers. Well, Sinister failed to capture Hope, and like an idiot, he informs Mystique that he is unable to help her save Rogue. Safe to say that Mystique doesn't appreciate that very much. She grabs and shoves Sinister's face onto the unconscious Rogue, and unable to get up, his life is sucked away. Now I'll admit, it's a little bit awesome, but in the massive gallery of villains losing their life, it's arguably one of the lamest ones. Imagine Sinister having to tell people about this one when he eventually returns. Embarrassing.
Number 2. Turned into a sundae. I don't actually know if Ice Cream died here, but it certainly seems to be implied that he did. At least to me it does. This is the canon that lives in my mind. Ice Cream was a character who could turn into ice cream, hence his name. Ice Cream, get it? He infiltrated the X-Mansion in the first and only issue of Obnoxio the Clown. Speaking of weird comics, that's another one. He wanted revenge on the X-Men because they had cooler mutant powers than he did. Although how he really planned to get said revenge and beat them when his powers only allowed him to turn into ice cream, I'm not really sure. He attempted to turn the danger room on the students, but this plan ended up failing, with Professor X lowering the temperature of the control room to below freezing, which caused Ice Cream to freeze solid. At the end of the story, Obnoxio the Clown decorates Ice Cream as a giant sundae, while Ice Cream's fate is left ultimately undetermined. We never see him again, and it's possible that he literally could have met his end by being mistaken and consumed as actual ice cream at some point later in his life, so yeah.
Number 1. Just take off the quiver. A lot of the time when a hero's light goes out, it will be in an ultimate display of self-sacrifice, throwing themselves into impossible circumstances in order to save the majority. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, that kind of thing. It's the number 1 heroic move, but it only really works when there is absolutely no other option. When looking at Hawkeye's sacrifice in Avengers Disassembled, there were a whole handful of other options, and most of them were pretty obvious, making for a heroic self-sacrifice that just ended up coming across as incredibly dumb and unnecessary. Basically, Wanda Maximoff has gone completely bonkers and turned on the Avengers, but none of them know that just yet. She's already caused the passing of both Vision and Scott Lang, Ant-Man, and all the Avengers have assembled in order to figure out what the heck was happening. Using her Hex powers, she created a Kree warship to show up out of nowhere and go on the attack. Hawkeye runs off to go get some more arrows, and when he comes back, he goes off, taking out Kree left, right, and center until he is hit in his explosive arrow quiver by an energy weapon. With his quiver on fire and set to explode, instead of just taking it off or firing off the arrows, Hawkeye grabs a Kree with a jetpack and blasts off into the warship, blowing both it and himself clean off the battlefield. Just silly.
Number 10. Shot by a diamond bullet. This is actually a pretty smart way to deal with Emma Frost, but all in all a pretty dumb way for her to die when you kind of read it on paper. Both like makes sense and doesn't make sense. I mean, Emma Frost has a diamond form, which makes her pretty much indestructible, for the most part anyways. So how does one defeat her when she's in her diamond form? Apparently by exposing the flaw in her diamond form and using the same material to kill her. How do you shatter a diamond? With another diamond, apparently. I don't know if that would actually work, but comic book science. Emma's diamond form is her secondary mutation, and while we've seen many attacks on her defended by this form of hers, apparently a diamond bullet can just insta-shatter her. I mean, I've heard of diamonds cutting diamonds, but never necessarily being used to completely shatter a diamond. If shot at her exact weak point though, apparently this is just what a diamond bullet can do, which is something one of the Cuckoos, Esme, knew about and exposed to kill Emma, mind-controlling mutant Angel Salvador to carry out the execution. Don't worry though, Jean, while merged with the Phoenix, managed to bring her back with Beast's help. Jean can do anything.
Number 9. Taken out by the Punisher. Some of the most creative forms of transportation to the afterlife come at the hands of Frank Castle, the Punisher. But at the end of the day, Frank is just one seriously messed up guy. A normal guy with a good chunk of training, a hell of an arsenal, and a little bit of creativity. He is not a match for a lot of the incredibly powerful beings out in Marvel Comics, but somehow we have the Punisher kills the Marvel Universe story. When his family were taken out by being bystanders of a superhero conflict, Frank is given the backing to take out all those who call themselves superheroes, and my god, a lot of these deaths make no sense, because of course they don't. He takes out the Hulk by waiting until he is Bruce Banner again, but that's never how the Hulk has worked in Marvel Comics. He took down Dr. Doom, with his only excuse for winning being that Doom stopped to give a speech, which does kinda make sense, but the worst example comes when he takes on the mutants. By the sheer will of lazy writing and Frank's throwaway explanation of manipulation, all the combined X teams are having their final battle against Magneto, Apocalypse, and their unholy alliance of acolytes and evil mutants on the moon in an air-sealed dome, which is where Frank drops a nuke on them, taking them all out. Ignore the fact that a good chunk of those here would be able to survive that kind of attack, and we're all good.
Number 8. Strung up like a Christmas decoration. This is going to be an interesting one to try and describe here. Whew, I do not envy myself in this moment. This demise also comes from the Punisher Max issue. Same story, but an earlier issue. Here in issue 28 of the series, before he gets to the head of the operation, Frank deals with his son, Christu, attempting to get information from him on his father, Tabiru, and their associate, Vera. He attempts to get him to talk by seemingly numbing him and using his organs as basically decorations for a tree. I don't know of Christu's fate, but I can't imagine it ended well for him, knowing how Frank usually deals with criminals. In fact, I'm pretty sure everyone has assumed, based on other things that are mentioned, or just in general based on Frank's nature, that Christu does not make it. Number 7. Crushed by tumors. Of course, when it comes to some of the worst ways to go, it doesn't get more gruesome and depressing than ruins. Every time I think I've escaped this alternate reality and my mind is free from it, there's always another list that brings me back to Marvel Ruins. In Marvel Ruins, one of the worst ways I've seen to go is the way of the Hulk. In this reality, superpowers are depicted as being brutally realistic, so when Bruce Banner becomes irradiated, instead of turning into, his giant, muscular, and vibrantly green alter ego, the Hulk, he just develops a bunch of green tumors that become so large that they basically crush him beneath their weight. Number 6. Death off panel, but then also cannibalism? Janet Van Dyne's death in the Ultimate Universe has to be one of the worst. First of all, we don't even show her enough respect to give her a death on panel, as she drowns during the tidal wave in Ultimatum, one of the many poor victims who die off panel despite deserving an on-death panel, especially considering Janet at the time was the leader of the Ultimates, so there's also that. But then, she also gets eaten by the Blob for some reason. It's also weird that they decided to make the Blob do this. I mean, the use of people eating people in Ultimates is just weird in general. I know the Blob is a bad guy as well, but he isn't typically known to be like a cannibal anywhere, ever. Feels like some weird and extremely gross sizeism to me. Number 5. Steamrolled. Well, this one did not kill the person who was victim to it. It would kill most other people and is still one of the worst ways I can think of to die that I've seen on display in the Marvel Universe. This death, not really a death, but could be, comes to us from the pages of Punisher issue number 17, part of the Marvel Knights line, written by Garth Ennis. It seems oddly slow and terrible, a properly terrifying way to go. Yep, we're talking about when Punisher has Wolverine steamrolled. This also happens after Wolverine has already suffered a ton of other awful stuff, losing the skin on his face, getting shot point blank below the belt, and having suffered an attempt at removing his legs with a chainsaw. While he obviously lives past being steamrolled thanks to his healing factor, Wolverine has heightened senses, so he would also feel immense pain with every single inch that the steamroller rolls over him. And he actually goes feet first underneath it. Yikes. Number 4. Shatterproof glass. So this is one of those things where the actual story behind it makes it a heck of a lot worse, and also more poetic in some ways. Once again, we're going to Punisher Max, and once again, we're going to the same story that I was talking about earlier with the insidious operation that Punisher attempts to put a stop to, helping to free the women who find themselves basically trapped within it. However, not all the women involved in this operation are actually victims. One of them is actually a crucial part of running the business, and even suggests how to best break the women they are holding and using so they can be more easily used and manipulated, more malleable. When Frank runs into her, he knows her involvement and decides to dole out a pretty awful punishment: death by being tossed repeatedly into shatterproof glass, which eventually does give out, with the woman, Vera, falling to her doom. I think it's the moments in between being tossed against the glass brutally that really make me feel this is one of the worst ways to go. Those pauses in between, I'm like, oh, cause you know what's coming and you have like no control. I don't like that. I don't like it. Number 3, slowly consumed. Yeesh! This is probably one of the worst ones I've ever seen or read. I mean, all of these are really bad, but this one haunts me. This one haunts me to this day. When I think about it from a psychological perspective, well, I can't really fully do that because it just messes up my mind too much, so I can't really do it, but you get the idea. Basically, during Marvel Zombies, which happens in an alternate reality, where most of the heroes and villains succumb to the virus, but not all of them, one of the people that manages to survive for a good long while is actually T'Challa, aka Black Panther. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that he gets out of the story unscathed, although he does not become a zombie for a very long time. At one point, he is lured into a trap and basically kept as a food source by Hank Pym, aka Ant-Man, or rather Giant Man, who prolongs his friend's death in order to keep the meat fresh, so that he might slowly consume him. Don't worry, Black Panther does manage to escape. He doesn't die this way, but not every single piece of him makes it. And there are others in Marvel Zombies like Mary Jane and Aunt May who actually do die by being consumed by someone they loved and trusted, Spider-Man. So, yeah. Number 2, stomach problems. Ugh. Okay, time to talk about Old Man Logan and his fight against Old Man Hulk. If you are familiar with the Old Man Logan universe and the stories that exist within it, I think you know where we're headed. For those of you who aren't, get ready and allow me to explain. Basically, in the Old Man Logan universe, the whole world is left in an apocalyptic state after the supervillains finally win and actually defeat the heroes. Success! Wolverine himself was manipulated into turning on his fellow X-Men by Mysterio, and now is only known as Logan. He doesn't like to go by Wolverine anymore, he doesn't like to think of that because it ended terribly. However, despite all of this and everything he has lived through, Logan still manages to find a way to keep moving and even ends up settling down and starting a family. However, he has to pay money to the Hulk gang, who basically have claimed the land that he and his family live on. Logan ventures out to get said money to basically pay his weird Hulk landlords and actually succeeds in collecting the money, but arrives home too late as the impatient Hulks returned early and actually murdered his kin. Seeking revenge, Logan challenges Pappy Banner, the head of the Hulk gang. Logan seems to lose the fight when Hulk eats him, but later on, Hulk dies of indigestion. That's what happens when you eat Wolverine. Number 1, Magneto. I think simply facing Magneto would be one of the worst ways to go. He is not a man I would ever want to come up against. I've seen him torment people by pulling all the metal out of their blood, pull off Wolverine's adamantium coating from his skeleton through his skin, and torment and kill a woman with a paperclip. And let's not forget that Magneto at his most skilled and powerful can actually just control blood flow in your body and your brain, basically taking control of your mind or just preventing oxygen from getting to your brain, thereby basically suffocating you in a really terrible way. He is basically one of the most frightening people that the Marvel Universe has to offer, and being killed by him for whatever offense he deems worthy of death, I imagine, would just be downright terrible, no matter what it was. Magneto isn't usually one known for doling out quick and painless punishments or deaths, so yeah. Number 10, Dark Beast. I think the worst thing about being killed by Dark Beast would be the fact that he would likely do everything in his power to actually not kill you. Which sounds counterintuitive to this list, but just go with me. He would just keep you alive while he subjects you to terrible biological experiments, which sounds pretty awful. Dark Beast is the alternate version of Hank McCoy of the X-Men who hails from Earth 295. Here, he is not a member of the X-Men, but one of Apocalypse's lead geneticists and allies. Earth 295 is basically an alternate reality where Apocalypse successfully conquered the Earth, spinning out of the Age of Apocalypse event and follow-up line. I would at least say that Age of Apocalypse kind of became a comic line afterwards because although Although the timeline kind of got fixed, it continued to go on. Dark Beast tends to focus more on experimenting on folks to improve them or simply to learn more about them. Also, improve them. According to Dark Beast, they're improvements. However, he isn't as morally sound as Earth 616 Hank is, which is why you wouldn't want to become his victim. Although right now, Beast of Earth 616, the main continuity, feels like he's kind of becoming more and more like his darker AOA counterpart. Honestly, being killed by Dark Beast would be terrible because it would likely be long, and drawn out, and in the end the dying would actually probably feel like a relief in comparison to everything else that you went through leading up to it. And friends, before I move on to my next spot on this list, if you love when we talk about some of the worst things to have happened in comics, you should check out our Worst Things That Happened playlist. We have one of those. Go check it out. Click the thing somewhere over here. Number 9. Statuified. While in her current series, the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, has not been killing anyone, she has been coming in hot with pretty epic punishments for the malicious villains who have crossed her path. In issue number 1, she actually ends up dealing with Corruptor, who she does not kill but does severely punish by turning him into stone. And even if he does get to live as a statue in the town, that's not really living, is it? In fact, initially, the town the Corruptor had tormented wanted to completely destroy him by smashing him in his statue form to little pieces. However, Wanda is the voice of reason here who cautions them against acting on vengeful impulses. Wanda kind of being like, look, I've lived that life, I wouldn't recommend. Still, we don't know what happened here, so, I mean, he could be dead, because Wanda's like, look, it's up to you, I wouldn't do it, bye, so they could have done it afterwards. And if he was killed this way, what a way to go. Though I imagine it's more likely that we'll see him return later in the series after having somehow escaped his stone prison to seek revenge on Wanda for trapping him there, because, I mean, that's just how comics usually go. So I'd be surprised if it doesn't happen, but, you know, I could be wrong.
Number 8. Punisher's Steamroller. Frank Castle isn't known for working well with others, but if there's anyone you'd think he'd get along with, it would be Wolverine. They teamed up in Punisher Volume 6, number 17, and it quickly went off the rails, with them being swarmed by a gang of little people who wanted to cut off their legs in order to make them short. In order to get Wolverine into a fit of berserker rage, Frank makes fun of Logan's height, causing Wolverine to go after him. Wolverine calmed down, but Punisher decided that he was slowing him down and blasted Wolvie's legs apart. After taking care of the gang of little people, Frank decides that the best way to keep Wolverine from coming after him is to run him over with a steamroller. Wolverine will obviously heal, so it doesn't have long-term consequences, but it's still a pretty rough move on Frank's part. Number 7. Alpha Flight vs. Michael Pointer. During the events of M-Day, a mutant named Michael Pointer was taken over by an evil being called the Collective, who used him to destroy an Alaskan town. S.H.I.E.L.D. sent in a couple fighter jets to keep an eye on the situation, but they were promptly destroyed and the Collective made his way into Canada. Now, keep in mind, this is a list of brutal moments for me. So imagine my excitement reading an Avengers issue where my favorite superhero team, Alpha Flight, shows up to try and reason with the villain. Now imagine my horror when the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent's command center suddenly loses contact and the next thing I saw was the entire team's twisted and mangled corpses. These guys had their own 130 issue series for years, so it's not like they're just nobodies, and now they were suddenly just dead. Now I get that not many people like the team as much as I do, so for perspective, imagine if your favorite team was the Fantastic Four, and they were horribly mutilated off-panel. Oh, poor Guardian. That's like the 5th time he's died. I think that what makes this such a brutal moment for me, beyond my personal attachment to the characters, is that it is so quick and off-panel, leaving us to imagine what horrible things were done to leave such a terrified-looking gory mess of Canada's super team. Number 6. Rick Jones's fate worse than death. Immortal Hulk is a cosmic horror series with plenty of brutal moments, with characters constantly getting eviscerated and transformed into creatures that are pure nightmare fuel. You could make the case for Banner, Absorbing Man, or any of the Hulks earning this spot, but no one quite got as brutal a fate as Hulk's old friend Rick Jones. When the Shadow Base wanted to go after the Hulk, they combined the deceased Rick's body with that of the Abomination, causing Rick to transform into a bizarre and terrifying creature with 2 of Rick's faces and hands growing out of his head, which would vomit acid at the Hulk while Rick begged for help. He was eventually removed from this abomination, but a few issues later, he was once again fused with a gamma mutate, this time Del Fry, leaving Rick a twisted co-joined mess with Rick's screaming head being the arm of a glowing green skeleton creature. Number 5. Carnage USA. One of Spider-Man's most brutal and sadistic villains is Carnage. He is a serial murderer named Cletus Cassidy, who bonded with a symbiote and became an even more dangerous and twisted villain. He has had a lot of brutal moments over the years, such as his actions in Maximum Carnage and Deadpool vs. Carnage, but my preference is for the miniseries Carnage USA. In this story, Carnage goes to a small town and sneaks into a meatpacking plant in order to eat an entire herd of cattle so that he can get strong enough to take over the town. He sends the symbiote in through the water pipes and takes over men, women, and children, forcing them to attack each other and holding a few of them hostage for and amusement. There are some brutal Cletus moments, such as sending a woman out to collect her husband's head in order to secure the safety of her children, but my favorite and most twisted is when he gathers all of the survivors in a church, hands out a bunch of pliers, and demands they pull out their own teeth in exchange for his mercy. Number 4. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe again. In Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, Deadpool became aware of his status as a fictional character and lost his mind, going on a brutal kill streak that resulted in all the Marvel heroes and villains getting dispatched in cruel and unusual ways. A few years later, in the sequel, we got to see a Deadpool from another world do the same thing. On this Earth, Deadpool is put under mind control by the villains of the Marvel Universe and tricked into going after his friends. What makes it even more disturbing than the first for me was the fact that while he's attacking the heroes, he is living a fantasy in his head that makes him think that he is going on lighthearted adventures with his friends. This is especially true of his encounter with Spider-Man while bonded with the Venom symbiote. In his mind, Deadpool and Spidey are entered into a pie-eating contest against the Blob in order to win money for charity. In reality, he's actually feasting on Spider-Man's brains. It's more brutal due to the lack of agency he's given in his story and the devastating consequences that it holds. Number 3. The Ultimatum Wave. The Marvel Ultimate Universe was a wild ride. It gave us Miles Morales as well as the romance between Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, so it makes sense that they would also give us some of the most bizarre and extreme Marvel stories. In Ultimatum, Magneto has been driven mad at the loss of his children and decides that rather than destroying humanity to make the world safe for mutants, he's just gonna kill everyone. He uses a doomsday device and his powers to shift the world off of its axis, causing natural disasters all over the globe. Much of Europe, including all of Latveria, is frozen under a layer of ice, and New York is hit by a massive tidal wave. Millions of people all over the world die in the attack, including Nightcrawler and Hank McCoy. Magneto then sends out more of his minions to destroy the heroes, causing the brutal deaths of several more heroes, including Hank Pym, Doctor Strange, and Thor, just to name a few. Professor X gets personally murdered by Magneto, who later has his face blasted off by Cyclops, who then gets assassinated at an anti-mutant rally. It is a relentless story, but I think the most brutal moment is when Pym finds his wife Janet being eaten by the Blob and responds by entering his giant form, picking up the Blob, and biting his head off. Number 2. Marvel Zombies. Marvel Zombies is pretty self-explanatory. It takes place on an alternate Earth where the heroes of the Marvel Universe have been infected with a zombie virus. They retain much of their intelligence and personality, but they are so consumed with hunger that they are willing to go to any lengths to get to their next meal. There is something so brutal about watching all of your favorite heroes hunt down Magneto and brutally and graphically eat him in the opening pages, and it only gets more disturbing going from there. I'd say that the most brutal moment in this story is the revelation that Hank Pym has been keeping T'Challa sedated but alive in a lab, and he has been removing his limbs one by one to eat. It's a brutal and disgusting story that you can't help but have fun reading. Number 1. Spider-Man's take on September 11th. There are way more gory and graphic Marvel moments on this list, but the fact that this comic features the real-life tragedy of September 11th, 2001 makes it hard to justify putting it lower on the list. Like, I can't sit here and say that a fictional tidal wave was worse than this. Anyways, this issue of Amazing Spider-Man was released a month after the tragedy and opens with Spider-Man surveying the devastation as civilians ask him why he didn't stop the attack. The book is kind of a mixed bag with the benefit of hindsight, with devastating moments like a little boy lost in the rubble looking for his dad, but also features moments like Dr. Doom crying at the sight of the devastation, as if he hasn't tried to do this exact same thing multiple times. I have mixed feelings about whether this book should have been made so soon after the real life events, but wherever you land, it's hard not to describe the events depicted as pretty brutal.
Number 10. Kingpin's Mutant Prison. Some of the worst fates really do come from ruins, where it feels like everything is just awful for the sake of being awful, I guess. I mean, this series was made to sort of contrast the Marvels, and it does that admittedly, but it does that without really having anything else to say, it kind of feels like. When it comes to Quicksilver, he's seemingly still alive in this series, but honestly I can't imagine for much longer, which is how he's kind of making my list here. He ends up having his legs and arms removed because he's too fast, likely. However, Kingpin, his jailer, here claims that this is actually done for, and I quote, Quickie's own good. Considering that it looks like it wasn't done very well, and that it looks like Quicksilver may even still be bleeding, possibly bleeding out at this point, I can't imagine he'll last too much longer, and honestly, what a terrible way to go. Honestly, just existing in ruins I feel like is a pretty terrible way to go, because if you exist in that world, you're probably already dead, or you're like on your way to dying. I mean, even the protagonist, the narrator we follow on this journey, Phil Sheldon is, so yeah, and he's like the protagonist, so, or at least the narrator. I would say he's still the protagonist, he's still kind of the character we follow. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love when we talk about pretty bleak things, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. Number 9. Invisible Woman. Marvel Zombies really does have some of the most gruesome deaths, which is why I would never want to go there myself. This one at least was kind of going to a person that deserved it though, although I feel bad about saying that because I really do love this character, so like it's still sad that this happens in this reality. We are talking here about She-Hulk's death. I do love She-Hulk, although in this instance She-Hulk was already zombified and it kinda ate the kids of Susan Storm, aka Invisible Woman, and Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic in this universe, Valeria and Franklin. Weird thing is, you'd think Franklin would have been able to like fend her off with his reality warping powers, which I assumed he would also have in this universe, but hey, maybe on Earth 2149 Franklin didn't have powers, or you know, he was depowered prematurely. Either way, when Susan finds out that She-Hulk as a zombie has used her knowledge of the Baxter Building codes as someone who was once part of the Fantastic Four team to get in and then devour these two, she loses it and uses her power to create a force field and basically pop She-Hulk's head like a grape. It's insane to me how powerful Sue is. I mean, I guess at least it'd be quick, but yeah, Susan Storm's pretty wild. I would not want to be messed with by Susan Storm. Don't make her upset. Number 8. What if Spider-Man became a murderer? This is maybe the brightest of the darkest what if stories that I have on this list, but you know, it's still really dark, so hence why it's here, especially at the start here. In issue number 72 of the 1989 What If series, we answer the question, what if Spider-Man became a murderer? Dun dun dun! With him confronting the burglar who killed his Uncle Ben and losing control of his emotions, killing said burglar in turn. This, however, eats Peter up inside, and it isn't until Dr. Kurt Connors becomes the Lizard and decides to fess up to his own actions that Peter is actually inspired and is able to confess to the murder that he was responsible for and reveal that he is the one that's Spider-Man. He does some time, but thanks to him showing remorse, he only gets 5 years, and Aunt May is still waiting for him when he gets out with his costume. It's dark, but it's also kinda cute in the end, because I think one of his biggest concerns was that Aunt May would like never love him again, and she is upset, but she eventually gets over it, and she's like, well, you know, this is still my nephew, so kinda nice. Still terrible, but kinda nice. Number 7. What if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? This one actually comes to us from a comic titled What If? starring Daredevil, the man without fear. But the question posed in the intro is, what if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? Which is that's why I named the point that. It might not seem as dark as some other tales in the what if category, but the intro literally also poses the question in this issue. What if we shed a little light on the dark side of the Marvel Universe? And the story definitely delivers there, I would say. Here, Matt's dad takes the dive for his son and earns the money needed to send him to law school. Sounds pretty good. There, Matt meets Elektra. Also sounds pretty good. The two have a love affair that ends when her father is killed and they're both unable to save him together. Okay, it's starting to turn kinda dark. She leaves and Matt is then forced to deal with his own family tragedy as his father ends up in the hospital after a hit in a fight leaves him comatose. Okay, it's getting darker. Unable to afford the bills, he drops out of school and himself becomes a fighter, but when he is asked to take a dive for a paycheck, he refuses. As punishment, his father is killed, and Elektra returns to encourage Matt to seek retribution. This is where it gets pretty dark, I would say. Matt basically goes after Wilson Fisk with his intention to do it his own way. Now, he doesn't want to kill him, but he just wants to expose him for his illegal business dealings, which is a very Matt Murdock approach, I would say. In the end though, Elektra kills Fisk for Matt basically during this confrontation, and Matt chooses to incriminate himself in the murder because he feels guilty about Kingpin's death. Yikes. Number 6. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by a radioactive spider? This What If comic, issue number 7 from the original series from the 70s, actually has 3 stories in it. In one of them, Flash Thompson tries on the role of superhero as he ends up becoming the one fatefully bitten by the radioactive spider that day in the science lab on the student field trip. And if you're wondering, well, Amanda, you know, Flash Thompson actually has been a hero. I know he's been a hero in the main continuity, but I mean, in this reality, he's trying on the superhero role of Spider-Man. He becomes Spider-Man and does his best to be a great hero, but actually dies during his attempt to be one. Sad. He fights the Vulture, and it's during a battle in the sky where the Vulture successfully manages to kick Flash off of him that Flash's Spider-Man falls to the ground. Unable to find much in the way of cushion or slowing his descent, the fall does him in, and Peter Parker finds Spider-Man in the alleyway, unmasking him to recognize the face of Flash Thompson, the ire of his high school experience. Now acknowledging the fact that Flash was Spider-Man though, Peter seems to forget all about this as he actually mourns the loss of Thompson, which makes it even more sad.
Number 5. Morbius, the living vampire. It's Morbius' world and we're just living in it. He first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 101 in 1971. The story goes, in a desperate attempt to save his own life as he suffers from a rare blood disease, Dr. Mike Morbius turns to a cure that uses vampire bat DNA because of course he does. It mutates him into a half-vampire, half-human monster. It's Morbiclock out there, and Morbius was actually initially kind of a bad guy. He fought Spider-Man and Blade before becoming a vigilante justice sort of anti-hero who struggles with the insatiable lust for blood. He's also desperate to find the cure to his vampirism. Honestly, in the comics, Morbius looks way scarier and monstrous than the Laughingstock movie. I think it's one of those things where the cartoon and artistic medium is much better at portraying the monster than Jared Leto is.
Number 4. MCU Gargantos. Gargantos is one of the monsters from Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness that I thought, you know, might be one of the big bads of that movie. Instead, I was wrong, and the beast was used simply as a distraction. Seemingly modeled after the comic book character Shuma-Gorath, Disney and Marvel decided against using the name of that character for copyright reasons, and so instead decided to use a name that solely belonged to them. Enter Gargantos. Although in the comics, Gargantos is less of a magical monster and instead is kinda like your typical multi-tentacled, one-eyed sea monster. In the film, it takes the combined efforts of Sorcerer Supreme Wong and Dr. Stephen Strange to defeat the beast, and Strange even pulls out some magical monster tricks of his own to stop Gargantos. While Gargantos appears in a multiversal film, him being based off of Shuma-Gorath would likely also make him a multiversal monster just straight up.
Number 3. Ghost Rider. Who could forget Johnny Blaze, one of the Ghost Riders set out to hunt down earthly baddies and drag them kicking and screaming to hell where they belong. The legacy of the Ghost Rider began in the pre-Marvel age with a ghostly cowboy who hunted the prairie of the American frontier. But the modern version is a stunt biker, Johnny Blaze, who becomes possessed by the demon Zarathos and becomes a flame-headed skeleton with a cool bike and fancy leather jacket, hunting down bad guys in the name of vengeance. At times, he's the bad guy himself, being the not polished hero that has no problem taking lives. At others, he fights with the other Marvel heroes to take down bigger foes. I mean, he looks badass Can we be honest here? And he's definitely one of my favorite Marvel monsters.
Number 2. Strange Supreme. Strange Supreme is the Dark Doctor Stephen Strange we see as is showcased in the Disney Plus What If streaming series in the Season 1 episode, What If Doctor Strange Lost His Heart Instead of His Hands? In this episode, Strange becomes obsessed with getting back Christine Palmer after losing her in a car accident instead of, losing his hands, because Christine was his heart. Get it? Because her death is considered an absolute point in time, the spirit of the Ancient One returns to Strange to remind him that he cannot do anything to bring her back. Strange doesn't like that answer and is like, I'm still gonna do stuff, so he gets split in twain, with one half of him choosing to do whatever it takes to get Christine back, because the Ancient One's like, I'm not gonna let that happen. Just cut you in half. This prompts him to turn to the dark arts, absorbing various creatures and monsters from the universe in order to get as much power as is needed to reverse Christine's death. In the end, this Strange of the multiverse becomes more monster than man, defeating his other half by reabsorbing him and breaking the universe to bits when he disregards all warnings and brings Christine back to life anyways once more. Doesn't even work out well because Christine's like, dude, you're like super evil, I'm like not here for this.
Number 1. Shuma Gorath. Quote, before all was, I was. Before time was, I waited. I fed on the screaming souls of the universe. I drank the spoiled milk of dead stars. I am the emptiness outside all understanding. I am Shuma Gorath. Is a pretty sweet way to introduce yourself. His character design is next to none as one of the great old ones who first appeared in a 1972 comic called Journey into Mystery Volume 2. This tentacle monster more so looks like a freak of nature than a typical monster. He's the ruler of hundreds of dimensions and comes to the Earth realm millions of years ago along with the other old ones. Around 1 million BC, he was banished from Earth by a time traveler sorcerer named Sea-Sneg. It was witnessed by Doctor Strange, who hoped to defeat the Ancient One so his master didn't have to die, but obviously it never really works out like that. But then Shuma Gorath reappears and becomes the main foe of Doctor Strange. While we can get into his whole villain arc with Doctor Strange, I would prefer to look at the other reality he appeared in with Earth 30847. He became an unlikely savior of Earth, and upon accepting that they thought of him as a hero, he ended up hosting a Japanese game show called the Super Monster Awesome Hour, which honestly, like, vibes.
Number 10. Thor and Hela. Starting off with an example of why the Ultimate Universe does some unnecessary stuff from time to time, Thor was forced to kill his supervillain's son to save America from civil war. But what's funny, well not funny, is that wasn't even the unnecessary part. So it begins in the aftermath of an event called Ultimatum, which we will get to much later on. Basically, Ultimate Thor ends up sacrificing his own life to save his lover Valkyrie. While in the afterlife, in order to be reunited with and save Valkyrie, the goddess Hela makes Thor fight a whole army of undead soldiers, which he does. But then Thor asks what else he needs to do, and this goddess just starts undressing herself and demanding that Thor gives her a baby. Which, of course he does, and it doesn't even save Valkyrie. This comes back later with the child, Modi Thor's son, being raised by a much more villainous Loki, feeling abandoned and seeking revenge, trying to turn America into a new Asgard while wielding an Infinity Stone and forcing Thor to eventually strike down his own evil son. Number 9. Look what they did to my boy! Almost everyone loves Deadpool. Weirdly, even some moms love Deadpool. So when the gritty, realistic, mature Ultimate Universe was going to bring the character in, you'd expect it to be a match made in heaven. No! I blame this version of the character for the monstrosity we got 3 years later in 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. The Ultimate Marvel version of Deadpool was a sergeant in the military named Wade Wilson. He's grim, he's angry, he's way too serious, and he also is an incredibly racist mutant hater. Oh, he was also a cyborg with incredible strength, he retained his signature healing factor, and instead of just being disfigured, he had no skin at all. And he's missing part of his skull, so his head is instead encased in a clear plastic case for everyone to see. Deadpool leads the Reavers, who are also racist, in trying to kill prominent mutants. Thankfully, Ultimate Deadpool was taken off the board by the 616 Deadpool in Deadpool Kills Deadpool in 2013. Number 8. Hank Pym needs to chill. Hank Pym has not really ever been that great of a dude. He has multiple untreated mental disorders and crazy insecurities that have caused him to do multiple not so great things in his time in the regular universe. But of course, everything in the Ultimate Universe gets ramped up a bit. Pym got involved in a very heated argument with his wife, Janet Van Dyne, over her friendship with Captain America. In Ultimates issue number 6, things start to get physical until the Wasp shrinks down to her smaller size to get away from her husband. Unfortunately, the terribly insecure Hank cornered her and sprayed her wasp-sized self with bug spray. She hid under a desk to catch her breath after inhaling the toxic fumes, while her husband just kept on with the emotional bombardment. But he didn't stop there. He then sent an army of ants after her until he realized what he was doing to his own wife. This stuff kind of boils my blood just a little bit. The fight resulted in Janet's very near death, her hospitalization, and his expulsion from the Ultimates. Number 7. Sasquatch. Although the Sasquatch, or Bigfoot in the real world, is a folklore monster, in Marvel he is actually Walter from down the street. Walter Lankowski, or Sasquatch, is actually a gamma mutate. The Canadians started to focus on gamma research after meeting Bruce Banner, and then specifically he focused on the Hulk after learning Hulk was indeed Bruce. While on leave from MIT, Dr. Lankowski began working on a gamma radiation experiment that could create a being like the Hulk, only under more controlled circumstances. Being bombarded by massive amounts of gamma radiation, Walter turned into a huge, hairy, light brown creature with similar abilities to the Hulk, and after rampaging, he learned how to retain his intelligence and personality while transformed, joining Alpha Flight as their heavy hitter. More recently, he actually got possessed by Doc Samson and is now green, and technically Sasquatch is Samson, so I hope that's not too confusing, because I'm confused. Number 6. Electro 1. Alright, Electro 1 should probably be on a list of robots, but his story is so classic monster-like that I just wanted to include him. A scientist named Wilbur Poole set out to create the world's most advanced computer, but a bizarre accident caused the computer to become sentient. It then brainwashed Poole and forced him to build a body to house itself. When Poole had finished the body, the computer moved itself to the robot and went out into the world, rampaging, like they always do. Electro, as the people called it, came into conflict with the US military, who proved no match for the numerous powers of the robot, which included psionic force fields, gamma ray blasts, atomic manipulation of living creatures, and object levitation, while also having a robotic metal body. He was eventually defeated by his creator and then eventually found by Reed Richards, who shrunk him down and set the robot to work in the Baxter Building. Electro 1 also joined the Fing Fang 4 and fought off the warlord Tim Boo Ba, which is a great sentence. Then he got confused for the villain Electro and was arrested. You should have seen that one coming though, I don't know. Number 5. Goom. Goom, the Thing from Planet X. In the Tales of Suspense number 15 from October 1960, the astronomer Mark Langley wanted to see if there was life on a planet he discovered called Planet X. So he tried to communicate with anyone through a transmitter. Unfortunately, the alien known as Goom received the transmission and followed the signal back to Earth, arriving in his ship to conquer the world. In a show of power against the world's leaders, Goom showed off some of his abilities and technology, like a time machine that could reverse someone back into a baby, a weapon that could destroy an entire mountain, or a force field that protected him from any weapon. He was even able to lift an entire city with his mind, but thankfully, the other members of his race, who were all pacifists, were contacted. They came, arrested Goom, and took him back to their planet. Number 4. Godzilla. Did you know Godzilla was a part of Marvel? He was even a part of Earth 616. Starting in May 1977, Marvel Comics published comics all about Godzilla. As some of you may know, Godzilla came to be during a Pacific nuclear test in the 1950s, in Tokyo in 1956. But then, the monster became trapped in ice off the coast of Alaska. It then resurfaced in the modern day, and S.H.I.E.L.D. put together a Godzilla squad to try and take on the massive creature. It went rampaging all over America, doing battle with S.H.I.E.L.D., the Champions, the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, the West Coast Avengers, a massive Red Ronin robot, and more, using his incredible nuclear atomic fire breath, insanely durable hide, regenerative powers, and its surprising intelligence. Number 3. The Hulk. Probably the most well-known monster in Marvel Comics, if you wanted to call him that. The power of the Hulk is almost unmatched. You know the story. When testing a gamma bomb he developed, Bruce Banner rushed out into the blast radius to save Rick Jones. He was blasted with an insane amount of gamma radiation, turning him into a hulking, gray-colored beast with incredible amounts of strength, durability, stamina, regeneration, speed, adaptation, and the ability to seemingly never pass away. His rampages are the things of legend, and the Hulk was the original reason all the Avengers even came together in the first place. One of the best characters Marvel has under its roof. Number 2. Mangog. The Mangog is the physical manifestation of the strength and hatred of a billion beings belonging to a race that was completely wiped out by the ruler of Asgard, Odin. To call him powerful is a bit of an understatement. While Thor has managed to defeat Mangog, usually by tapping into the omnipotent potential of the Odin Force, as long as hate exists in the universe, Mangog will exist and grow more powerful as hate grows and festers, even during battles. He's gone toe-to-toe with Odin, who is one of the most powerful beings in the universe. In fact, Mangog is one of the few beings that Odin is actually afraid of. He's fought both Thor and Odin at the same time to the point that they were completely incapacitated. He swatted away Mjolnir like a fly and taken star-destroying weapons to the face with ease, and he's even survived being thrown into the sun with only a minor char. Number 1. Shuma-Gorath. Yes, it is a giant tentacled eyeball, but hold off on the laughter because Shuma-Gorath the Destroyer, the Conqueror of Midnight, the All-Killer of the Dawn, is a ridiculously ancient being and greatest of the old gods or many angled ones. Among his many powers is the ability to communicate with and control others nearby and across dimensions. He can create and direct powerful blasts of mystical energy and affect transmutations on a planetary scale. His skin alone is difficult to damage even with the most powerful of magic. While his form seems silly, it's actually only a shell containing his power, and he can alter his appearance and his true form is not even visible to humans. He can destroy multiple galaxies solely through his aura pressure, and Shuma-Gorath also has the ability to destroy realities. He is most powerful in his home dimension, just like others of his kind, and only part of his power has actually appeared on Earth. And with the stuff he has done, that should tell you just how powerful he is.
Number 10. Freshly hatched spiders. Yuck! This is one of the worst ones out there if you're asking me. It comes to us from one of my all-time favorite spooky Marvel stories, which is featured in Edge of Spider-Verse issue number 4, the previous Edge of Spider-Verse, not the newest one to come out. And the story that we're talking about here is that of Patton Parnell. I love Patton Parnell. Patton Parnell is an alternate version of Peter Parker who is basically a psychotic serial killer in the making. Once he is transformed by a radioactive spider bite, he gains more confidence and literally turns into a monster. He gets revenge on his Uncle Ted, who has mistreated him throughout the years, by placing spider eggs inside of him. Yikes! And, well, those eggs hatch. Uncle Ted isn't the only one who seemingly meets his end this way either. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not smash that subscribe button? I know there's some of you out there, some of you that aren't subscribed, probably not you folks that are commenting. I know you've probably subscribed, but you over there, yeah, you should subscribe. Number 9. Lights, Camera, Fire. I feel like so many of these are going to come from Punisher comics because honestly, it's one of the darkest characters we have over at Marvel, and he has also had his own Max series, which was basically all about living on the edge when it came to more graphic subject matter. So if you want some of the worst ways, that's where you're gonna go. You're gonna go to Punisher Max. Case in point, in issue number 30 of Punisher Max, when Frank is in the midst of hunting down those who own an operation that treats people as though they were mere objects. It's a thing I can't say on this platform, but I think you know what I'm talking about here. It's that kind of operation where you're treating people like they're not people. One of the worst things a person can do in terms of business, and one of the most powerful motivations in comics for heroes, or rather anti-heroes, to seriously mess up some bad guys, which is exactly what Frank does to the men involved who are stationed in America. And woman. The older man, Tiberiu, Punisher captures and lights up, recording his demise on film as a warning to be delivered to those in Moldova. Number 8. Driven Mad by Power. Another awful way to die, of course, coming to us from Runes, is the fate of Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer dies as a result of what they believe to be a sort of superhero madness. In essence, it's believed that Silver Surfer missed the feeling of breathing air for some reason, being unable to as he was, traveling in the vacuum of space without, of course, needing to breathe. However, However, this was the very time when he decided, hey, you know what? I'd love to breathe right now, even though there's no air around me. Not a great time considering, yeah, there's no oxygen there, you're just floating around in the space between stars and planets. However, Silver Surfer is believed to have basically torn himself apart, clawing at himself until his lungs were exposed, and of course, despite having the power cosmic, he died. It's believed he died from the shock of the cold. I mean, honestly, what a way to go. Become so crazed that you think tearing yourself apart so you can breathe while flying alone in outer space on a silver surfboard is a good idea, or is simply something you must do. I can't imagine that. Also, I love how it's like, I gotta breathe, like time to rip myself apart. Okay then. Number 7. Squip Grub Chulp. What does that mean? You're about to find out. Symbiotes are definitely some of the most frightening creatures we have in the Marvel Universe. Definitely would not want to be rescued by one. Sorry Venom. But also would never want to be dubbed a criminal by one. For years, Venom had been threatening to eat people's brains, and guess what? It also became more than a threat at one point. Venom threatened to do this because the symbiote actually feeds on the happy chemicals that brains produce. So either it needs a host with a good supply of that, or one that basically snacks on chocolate a lot, which is why Eddie usually does that. Otherwise, it would literally have to find some brains to eat because it needs those chemicals, baby. Now, I'm pretty sure Venom has moved past this requirement in the modern day of comics right now, but it doesn't stop it from being a deeply disturbing thing that the symbiote did/needed to do to survive at one point. Also, for anyone who was wondering, the name of this point is the sounds that Venom made when, you know, scarfing down some brains. So, ugh. Number 6. Microwaved. This one makes me very uncomfortable, but I'm gonna tell you about it anyways because that's my job, so that's what I gotta do right now. Even though, of course, it's in a Deadpool story, which I think is the only place you could get away with something like this at Marvel Comics. In the comic Deadpool Kills Deadpool, we head to the multiverse where Deadpool, a version of Deadpool anyways, is hunting down, well, other Deadpools. Like the title says, Deadpool kills Deadpool. That's what's happening here. Right at the beginning of the series in issue number 1, the sinister black-suited Deadpool ends up confronting his alternate zombified self, Headpool, who is of course also known as Deadpool though, but we're gonna call him Headpool for clarity's sake. Headpool hails from the Marvel zombie universe of Earth 2149, where the world was ravaged by zombies. This zombie though ended up making his way to Earth 616 before he was reduced to just being a head. So how does the evil Deadpool deal with him? Pretty easily and terribly by popping him in a microwave. Splat! Number 5. Devoured by spiders. What a way to go. I just love spooky, scary Spider-Man stories, and this one comes from another tale based in the Spider-Man multiverse. We are talking about the fate of Spiders-Man. Spiders-Man is like Spider-Man, but this Peter Parker, instead of becoming a man with spider-like powers, basically became spiders. Peter Parker in this case fell into a vat of experimental spiders who devoured him completely. However, because science, they also ended up taking on his consciousness, which survived his physical death, with the spiders becoming kind of like a new version of that character. The hero Spiders-Man, who is entirely made up of spiders, and who also kind of goes on to become a villain, but that's a story for another time. Now, I personally am not too bothered by spiders in my everyday life, but I also feel like I've never dealt with, you know, a whole vat of hungry spiders who wanted to eat me. So on paper, this one remains pretty terrifying to me, even though I'm usually pretty cool with spiders. Number 4. The Needy Revenge. On our part 1, we talked about the tragic and disrespectful death of Janet Van Dyne in the Ultimate Universe, aka the Wasp, but at least we can say she was avenged. Or we could say that if this avenging wasn't so terrible. I don't know if we can quite say that because it's pretty terrible what happens here. When Hank Pym, aka Giant Man, aka Ant-Man, finds out that not only is Janet dead, but that the Blob also desecrated her corpse by, you know, well, eating her, he decides to get revenge by doing the same to Blob, but while he is still alive, because Ultimate Universe. Hank grows to his giant size and then picks Blob up and basically bites off his head. Although at least I guess he doesn't eat him, he instead, you know, spits Blob's head out, but still the whole scene is not saved from being insanely awful, I'd say, and this is still not a way that I personally would want to go. Honestly, facing a giant being just seems like a bad way to go in general. I don't like that idea. I don't like things that are gigantic. It makes me uncomfortable. If you're not eaten, you're still likely getting squashed, and that's just a yikes to me. I don't want someone to step on me. That's no thank you. Number 3. Sinking with your best pal. Possibly one of the worst ways I can imagine going just in general. Whether we're talking about comic books or real life, this way is pretty bad. Even just based on the circumstances here, the way that Captain Kate Pride went is just really sad too. She went down with a ship, drowned, which many have said is actually one of the most painful ways to go. And what made her death even worse was that she believed one of her best friends, her pal Lockheed, also perished with her. This happened when Sebastian Shaw attempted to remove Kate from the Hellfire Trading Company, which she sat on the board of as their Red Queen, by, well, I mean drowning her, killing her. You know. Number 2. Starvation and isolation. This one comes to us from Magneto, who saw this as a fair punishment to dole out to Red Skull, based on his treatment of other humans during World War II when he was obviously allied with Germany in the Third Reich. Magneto in essence took Red Skull to an isolated underground bunker, leaving him trapped there without any way out as the door was locked and located on the roof of the bunker. Red Skull was left with no ladder and only some water to basically keep him company, which he'd have to ration in order to prolong his survival, although obviously I don't think Magneto really intended him to survive. During his time trapped here, he began to hallucinate and started to lose his mind as starvation set in. I think this is possibly one of the worst ways to go in general, so once again, Magneto takes one of our top spots. Basically, don't upset Magneto. Just don't do that. Number 1. Carnage. I'd like to thank Fireball Earth for this terrifying and very true suggestion, so thank you from the comments. This is such a good point. Carnage is so frightening. Carnage is definitely one of the worst ways to go in the Marvel Universe. With Carnage, you not only have to deal with having your life ended by a symbiote, which honestly, like I said, is terrifying enough, but you also have to deal with Cletus Cassidy, who is the other part of Carnage. Carnage is one entity made up of 2, serial killer Cletus Cassidy and his soulmate, the alien symbiote offspring of Venom, who we often name Carnage, but technically Carnage is the entity of both of them together. Anyways, this symbiote is actually Venom's first child, who quickly became known as one of the most cruel and deadly out there, largely due to their connection to Cletus. I've seen what Carnage does when he has a whole town full of people to play with in Carnage USA, when the villain took control of an entire town, and it is definitely not pretty. Hands down, it's one of the most frightening Carnage stories I've ever read, so I would not want to be part of that at all. No thank you.
Number 10. Wolverine loses his skeleton. During 1993's Fatal Attractions crossover event, the X-Men once again had to go up against their old rival, Magneto. The X-Men got the upper hand in this conflict by using the combined psychic powers of Jean Grey and Professor X to cause Magneto to relive all of his worst memories in order to distract him, which is already pretty brutal when you consider that Magneto was a prisoner in German death camps in World War II. Wolverine attacks Magneto and gets a good scratch in, which leads the Master of Magnetism to do one of the most disturbing things imaginable to the fuzzy Canadian. He pulls out Wolverine's metal skeleton, leaving him a twisted heap of adamantium as the X-Men can only look on in horror. It's a brutal moment, but it doesn't really fit the never saw it coming side of this. I mean, he's a guy with metal bones fighting a guy named Magneto. If anything, I'm surprised this doesn't happen more often. Number 9. Sentry vs. Ares. When Norman Osborn set his sights on conquering Asgard, he tricked the god of war Ares into helping him do it. As the battle raged on, Ares discovered that he had been tricked and turned on Osborn, vowing to destroy him. Unfortunately, Norman had the Sentry with him. Worst still, this version of Sentry had given in to the darker urges of his void self. Ares did his best against Sentry, but the fight ended in a truly brutal fashion, with Sentry ripping Ares in half in a shower of gore and entrails. It's a lot, but although you could make the case for it being one of the most graphic Marvel moments, I don't think it checks enough emotional boxes for me to consider it the most brutal by any means.
Number 8. Torn to Shreds. This was a hard one to rank because while I feel like it would be really awful, I also still feel like there's somehow worse out there in the Marvel Universe waiting for me were I a person. Gosh, that would be terrible. I would hope that I was a superhero. That's the best I can hope, really. Still, this kind of death is pretty much as bad as it gets if we're speaking in general terms than, you know, straight up ranking it as one of the worst ways to die in the Marvel multiverse, which is kind of actually what we are doing here, but still, I digress. It's pretty bad. Deadpool is one of the folks who has undergone this usually life-ending process multiple times. One such time actually happened when he faced off against Carnage, who actually made a pretty dramatic appearance on our part 2 for this series. Of course, Carnage would take this approach to fighting and probably also immensely enjoy it, which it makes it it, I think, that much worse. Now, because this is Deadpool, he didn't die here because Deadpool. However, this wasn't even where everything ended for Deadpool, because Carnage also was plotting to burn down the building that this happened in. So Deadpool would have in theory been diced and then kind of flambéed.
Number 7. Absorbed by the Hulk. One of the most feared figures in the Marvel Universe for both hero and villain alike is the Incredible Hulk. Despite his reputation as a giant raging green monster, the Hulk goes out of his way to not be responsible for the deaths of any of the civilians or villains that he has to fight while rampaging through the world. Despite this, it does happen from time to time. In the Ultimate Universe, the Hulk is known for eating people, which is of course a terrible way to go, and getting smashed by the Jade Giant would of course be a horrible experience, but I think the worst way that you could meet your end at the hands of the Hulk is the way featured in Immortal Hulk number 8. In this issue, the Hulk has been captured by a secretive Black Ops organization called Shadow Base. In order to prevent the Hulk from escaping, they have vivisected him into multiple pieces which they keep in separate jars, in order to prevent his healing factor from allowing him to come together and escape. The evil Dr. Clive, who is in charge of the program, is running various cruel experiments on the Hulk in order to fully understand the power of his healing factor. Little did Clive know, he was doing exactly what the Hulk wanted him to. He wanted Clive to run the experiments so that he could learn more about himself, and once he knew what he needed, he controlled his hand in one of the jars to snap its fingers, creating a shockwave that shattered the jars, allowing Hulk's various parts to reform and heal. Hulk took Dr. Clive's treatment personally, and as he reformed, he absorbed the Doctor into himself, causing the Doctor to be smothered by the Hulk's innards as he desperately begged for mercy that wasn't coming. It is a fitting end for such a character, but it's not a fate I would want to endure while living in the Marvel Universe.
Number 6. Ripped in half. Being ripped in half really does not seem fun, and yet for some reason this is a very common way to die when it comes to Marvel Comics. I can't count how many times someone has been ripped in half. I literally can't, because every time I attempt to, I actually think of another occurrence of this happening, and then I have to start all over again. So it's very hard for me to put a number on that one. It's terrible. Or, you know, maybe it's just comics. The one thing I'd really warn against, you know, if you're looking out from us at the Marvel Multiverse, is that while living in whatever world you are in, you should basically never do this to another person, be they villain or hero, regardless of your alignment or their alignment. Just don't do it. I've seen this kind of could basically come back to haunt characters who generally also get torn in half by someone else as some kind of like karmic payback. So if you've done it to someone, it's probably coming for you.
Number 5. Dracula. Moving from a pseudo-vampire to the lord of all vampires. Dracula is an incredibly old vampire, sorcerer, and nobleman who became the supreme ruler of all vampires while also being the most powerful vampire of all time. The Wallachian Count Vlad turned himself into a vampire in order to face the invading Ottoman forces in the 1400s. Now, minus the abilities native to most vampires, including superhuman attributes, hypnotism, immortality, and shapeshifting, Vlad is a sorcerer, and he has even the ability to control the weather to a degree that can even oppose both Storm of the X-Men and the god Thor. Recently, he has declared the site and surrounding area of Chernobyl the Vampire Kingdom. He used this seat of power to steal the blood of Wolverine that allowed Dracula to survive in sunlight for a limited time, but he has done so much more during his long run in Marvel Comics starting in 1950. Number 4. Fin Fang Foom. He whose limbs shatter mountains and whose back scrapes the sun. Fin Fang Foom is a member of a race of shape-shifting aliens from a world called Kakaranthara, or if you prefer the much easier Maklu 4. Foom was the navigator of the spacecraft that landed on Earth in ancient China, and he volunteered himself to be put in a tomb in a deep slumber to serve as a backup plan for the other Makluans to conquer Earth. Fin Fang Foom looks a lot like a kind of humanized Chinese dragon when he is in his natural form, and is a massive shapeshifter from anywhere between 32 to 255 feet. As a dragon and alien, he possesses super strength, stamina, durability, and longevity, as well as telepathy and flight, spiritual possession, energy assimilation, acid mists, and potential transmogrification abilities. He has fought and allied with so many different heroes over his time, including a hilarious fight with the Hulk where he was thrown to the moon. Number 3. Zenmu. The alien cybernetic monster Zenmu is an incredibly intelligent being with a huge amount of strength and power. Introduced in Marvel Comics in 1960's Journey into Mystery, he is one of the first monsters introduced, and he even predates the Fantastic Four. Zenmu is able to cast hypnotic rays that can control the entire human population. He can use telekinesis, scatter his atoms, and even inhabit host bodies. In other words, Zenmu is incredibly powerful. Most recently, Zenmu was a foe to the Hulk in the Immortal Hulk series. He was hired by the Roxxon company to ruin the Hulk's public image by creating disasters and swooping in to save the day. Zenmu used his hypnotic powers to persuade civilians and even close friends and allies of the Hulk to turn their backs on him. Thankfully though, the Hulk managed to break free of his control, and he actually completely destroyed Zenmu. Coming in at number 2 is Man-Thing. Ted Sallis was a scientist first assigned to something called Project Sulfur, in which he created a serum that made people immune to all toxic biochemicals. But it also, unfortunately, turned them into monsters. This serum was called SO2. However, Sallis had to flee from forces who desired his formula for their own nefarious purposes. He injects himself with the serum, but after crashing in a specific swamp and dying, he is transformed into a swamp creature through a combination of this formula and magical forces existing in the area. As Man-Thing, Ted is practically invincible. He can be destroyed, but as long as there is vegetation on Earth, he grows back his body. Depending on the situation, his super strength is possibly limitless. He has fought against the Hulk, the Thing, and the entire Marvel Champions team. Man-Thing also has the ability to teleport around the Earth using Nexus points. He can breathe underwater and can't really be held captive, as he can just ooze past objects. Like if you locked him behind bars, he can just walk through the bars. The last of his powers consists of detecting emotions. Positive emotions make him feel calm and reserved, but negative feelings make him go ballistic, making him secrete an ooze that can burn almost anything, including Luke Cage's skin. Man-Thing is also capable of controlling the nexus of all realities. During Fear itself, Man-Thing's power increased, releasing him from the bond to the nexus of all realities and allowing him to teleport wherever he wishes at will. And later, his powers grow so great that he is able to manipulate reality. Also, Man-Thing is one of the few beings shown to be naturally immune to the Marvel Zombies plague. And in at number 1 is Jormungand. According to Norse legend, Jormungand is the son of Loki and the Jotunheim sorceress Angerboda. Realizing the danger that Jormungand posed to the gods of Asgard, Odin, the ruler of the realm of Asgard, banished Jormungand to the depths of the ocean of Earth, or Midgard. Now Jormungand not only survived in the oceans, but grew to an incredible size. At his full size, Jormungand was big enough to encircle the entire planet, and Jormungand became known as the Midgard Serpent. It was prophesied that on the day of Ragnarok, when it is said that most of the gods of Asgard will pass away, that Odin's son Thor will kill the Midgard Serpent, but Thor himself would die as a result of the Midgard Serpent's venom. So, we know the Midgard Serpent's venom can kill Asgardian gods, but by compressing his coils around the planet, he could also magically cause storms, earthquakes, and other disasters. He was also usually in an ethereal form, making him invisible and intangible to humans, but if he came out of this form fully, he would destroy a lot of stuff on Earth. So it's kinda good that he stays that way. In battles he has had with Thor, only a part of him ceased to be ethereal, and that one part was absolutely massive. Becoming visible also froze time while he and Thor battled. Thor and beings as strong as him are the only ones capable of defeating the serpent, but Thor is the only one to have actually done it. Number 10. Black Widow and Iron Man. A change in the Ultimate Universe that actually made sense in my head for some reason was the relationship between Tony Stark and Black Widow. Shortly after Iron Man joined the S.H.I.E.L.D.-sponsored Ultimates team, he and Natalia Romanova struck up their relationship, and it went so far the two eventually got engaged, with Tony even giving Black Widow her own nanite-controlled suit of armor, which did look really cool by the way. But the happy couple didn't last too long, as it turned out that Natalia was actually a traitor, working for the Liberators, which is a whole other thing we could talk about. After she turned on Tony, she managed to end the life of his longtime butler and close friend Jarvis. Kind of an unredeemable act there. So it didn't feel so bad when Tony used the nanites inside Natalia's body, the ones used to control that fancy new armor, to paralyze her and steal information from her brain about the Liberators and her betrayal. And then he knocks her unconscious with a wine bottle, giving her brain damage. There was also this whole raunchy video that got leaked of the two, which just felt completely random to me, but hey, it happens. Number 9. Black Panther. A lot of stuff in the Ultimate Universe I can look past, but I gotta say I don't like what they did to Black Panther here. You see, in the Ultimate Universe, T'Challa Udaku, the youngest son of King T'Chaka, when he became jealous of his older brother M'Baku, who was set to take on the Panther Trials, T'Challa decided to secretly go do it himself. What are the Panther Trials? Well, it basically involves hunting and defeating an actual panther in combat. So yeah, the young T'Challa ain't ready for that kind of thing, and he loses. Badly, with the panther actually tearing out T'Challa's throat. Being brought back to Wakanda, he undergoes 16 hours of surgery, and even then, the supposedly super advanced nation is not able to save him. So of course, they turn to the United States of America. Specifically, they turn to the super reliable Weapon X program. Now, Weapon X is able to save T'Challa, minus his vocal cords. But similar to Wolverine, they give him mutant abilities that enhance his strength, speed, stamina, agility, night vision, and they even give him retractable bone claws, and then give him the title of Black Panther. He is then put under the control of Nick Fury, who refuses to let him go back to Wakanda, makes him the property of the United States, and has him trained under Captain America. Now there is more to this story, but taking the awesome culture-rich Wakandan hero and making him a sort of Wolverine clone who can't speak and is the property of the United States government just kinda feels wrong, man. Number 8. Victor Von what? This point is going to cover one very small thing. For the ultimate version of Doctor Doom, I honestly don't have much issue with the changes they implemented. The metal skin, the goat legs, the backstory change, even what they did to his kingdom, it's alright, I guess, for me. One thing I cannot abide is changing his last name to have him seemingly related to a real-world action star. Victor Van Damme? Van Damme? Why? Who do these buffoons think they are? Sorry, I'm getting a little worked up here. He was also way more of a petty character than he was an extremely dangerous villain. Luckily, that changed slightly before the Ultimate Run came to an end, but the damage was done. Let's just move on.
Number 7. Zombie Scarlet Witch. On Earth 2149, things were relatively similar to Earth 616, until one day, a traveler from an alternate dimension showed up at Avengers Mansion, warning of the Earth's impending doom at the hands of an army of the dead. Who was this interdimensional traveler? None other than the groovy Ash Williams from the Evil Dead franchise. The heroes ignore this strange and irritating man, but soon after they discover that the threat is real and they are bitten by the zombie horde and transformed into the living dead. Ash eventually teams up with Earth's Scarlet Witch and Dazzler to try and find the Book of the Dead and save the Earth, but Wanda was eventually bitten by a zombified Punisher and turned into a zombie herself. Now, in the zombie universe, there are plenty of zombie heroes to choose from, such as Captain America, Spider-Man, and even Howard the Duck. But for this list, we decided to go with Scarlet Witch, as her incredible powers make her a terrifying force to be reckoned with under the best of circumstances. But the idea of all that power having an insatiable taste for human flesh is even worse.
Number 6. Ice Giant Thor. In What If Thor in 2018, we got the story of what if Thor was raised by frost giants. Laufey, the king of the frost giants, defeats Odin in their battle so long ago, and just as Odin took the infant Loki, Laufey takes the kid Thor and raises him as his own. Loki is obviously here as well, and like usual, they form a pretty tight bond as adopted brothers. Unfortunately, due to Thor's strength and skill in battle, not to mention his fondness for summoning the power of lightning, he is praised among the frost giants and by Laufey himself, who begins to completely forget Loki, his actual true son. Instead, Loki finds the captured Freya in the dungeons and she teaches him how to use magic. Loki eventually busts her out of prison and together they attempt to escape to Midgard. They go to the ruins of Asgard and attempt to repair the Rainbow Bridge until Thor and Laufey show up. Loki ends the life of his father while Thor unknowingly ends his mother with a blast from his giant ice hammer, Ice Crusher. Thor almost takes out his brother as well, but at the last minute, he lets him go. We don't know what happens next, only that Loki went to Midgard, had kids and a family, and apparently became a hero. It actually ends on a rather sweet note.
Number 5. Vampire Daredevil. When Magneto's ultimatum wave devastated New York in the Ultimate Universe, one of the victims of the flood was the original Daredevil, Matt Murdock. Feeling that Hell's Kitchen needed its champion, Murdock's old mentor, Stick, sought out Raymond Connor to become Matt's replacement. Like Matt, Raymond was blinded in an accident and developed similar abilities. After being trained by Stick, Raymond took on the Daredevil mantle, using a yellow and red variation of Matt's red costume. This new hero's career was cut extremely short when he was bitten by a vampire version of the Nerd Hulk. This turned the new Daredevil into a terrifying and effective vampire, even managing to bite Captain America and defeat Blade in combat. Thankfully, before he could land the killing blow, he was teleported to Iran, where he perished in the sun.
Number 4. Steel Corpse. In Marvel's Age of X universe, the X-Men never existed to represent mutants, and as a result, the mutant population had become the ultimate enemy. In response to this, the mutant Magneto used his powers to literally steal buildings from New York and form Fortress X, a safe haven for mutant kind. This led to the creation of a team of non-mutant heroes by General Frank Castle and led by Captain America to hunt down this resistance of mutants. Among the members of this team was a version of Iron Man named Steel Corpse. This Iron Man had become infected by a technological virus that fused him with his armor. Inside the armor, Iron Man has slowly been digested by the suit over the decades since he was trapped inside. The worst part is that this group of Avengers eventually decided that they weren't going to attack the mutants who were just trying to survive. So the government takes control of Steel Corpse and forces the suit to attack. It's twisted, it's sick, and it's absolutely terrifying to imagine being slowly consumed by a suit of armor you can literally never escape.
Number 3. The Maker. Despite having his flaws, Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four is an important and heroic figure in the Marvel Universe. Despite his heroics, we did witness a spectacular fall from grace for Reed in the Ultimate Comics universe, otherwise known as Earth 1610. In this universe, Magneto created a doomsday weapon called the Ultimatum Wave, which caused a tidal wave that killed thousands of people. This, combined with the stress of the Fantastic Four breaking up and Sue Storm rejecting his marriage proposal, caused Reed to snap and blow up his childhood home to fake his death, killing his family in the process. He went on to use aliens under his control to attack the heroes. He was eventually defeated and disfigured by the Human Torch and flung into the negative zone. Reed returned to Earth and took on the identity of the Maker and set out on a twisted quest to make the world perfect. He killed all the Asgardians in an attempt to understand Thor's power and used antimatter to attack Washington DC, killing POTUS, his cabinet, and all of Congress. The Maker went on to do a lot of twisted stuff, fighting the heroes of his own Earth as well as the heroes of Earth 616, proving that if not kept in check by a strong moral compass, Mr. Fantastic's amazing mind can be the ultimate source of terror.
Number 2. Space Punisher Hulk. Space Punisher Hulk has only appeared in 2 comic books, but despite that, he has shown that he is completely terrifying. For starters, he is a completely separate entity from Bruce Banner, whose body is literally trapped inside Space Punisher Hulk. This means that nothing that happens to Bruce Banner affects the Hulk. Space Punisher Hulk, while having all the powers of the Hulk, also has an extra set of arms and is quite a bit taller. He is described as a destructive killing machine, well known for destroying spaceships, defeating the Fantastic Four, ripping off the Thing's hand and tying up Mr. Fantastic in a knot in the process. He has taken out Doc Samson with his own hair, bit straight through Sabretooth, and de-lifed Deadpool by literally tearing off his head, which shouldn't actually work, but I digress. He defeated and ended the lives of 6 Watchers single-handedly, he broke the leader's back in combat, and he also ripped out Bruce Banner from his own chest. He is virtually invulnerable, seemingly indestructible and invincible. He can move faster than light and pass through barriers of existence and reality. The Hulk is scary on a regular day. Space Punisher Hulk? No thanks, I'm good.
Number 1. Spiders Man. On Earth 11,580, Peter Parker was taking a tour of a lab that was conducting radiation experiments on a colony of spiders. Peter fell into the spider habitat and was promptly devoured by the spiders. In an odd twist of fate not dissimilar to the villain Swarm, the spiders absorbed Peter's consciousness and became a hive mind that formed together to masquerade as a human and fight crime, thus becoming Spiders-Man. Spiders-Man fought crime for a time, but soon developed a taste for human flesh. The Spiders managed to hide this for a time, and were recruited by the superior Spider-Man in his multiversal quest to defeat the villainous Inheritors. He eventually betrayed Otto by joining forces with the Norman Osborn Spider-Man of Earth 44,145 to try and destroy the Web of Life. This plan failed, but Spiders-Man did manage to spread his spiders across the multiverse, giving them a foothold in every different reality.